Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto gets married on his training trip Naruhina. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Spirit of the Abyss, and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Naruto sat on the railing and looked out into the night. The landscape formed an abstract pattern of light and shadow, moonlight bouncing off the snow on the mountains, and then disappearing into the crevices. He tried to remember if any of it had looked any different when he arrived here almost 3 years ago, but he couldn't decide. It could be the mountain, but then again it could just be him. He was supposed to go back tomorrow. He heard a door slide open and shut behind him, and felt the soft movement of air caused by her presence. She moved just past him and set something down on the floor. He took his eyes off the landscape and looked down at her. She was kneeling on the floor in a kimono, the sleeves tied up and her long blue-black hair tied into low tail. She calmly started to make the tea, hands moving in slow, certain movements, mixing the water and tea, then whipping it into a foamy green froth. Standing up, she moved to hand him one of the cups. "Here, Naruto-kun," she said, her voice quiet and soft, but lacking the trembling edge of nervousness it once held. "Thanks, Hina-chan," he said, taking both of the cups, which looked tiny in his large hands so that she could boost herself up onto the railing beside him. She took the sleeve down before scooting herself slightly closer to him, and taking her tea back with a grateful smile. They sat next to each other in silence for a few minutes, tea warm in their hands, until Naruto finally couldn't stand it anymore. "Don't be so nervous, Hina-chan. Everything is going to be fine. I can't wait to get back and show that Sasuke who the best is. I'm going to kick his butt in the Jounin exams. No one can beat me, the next Hokage." He looked over at Hinata. She was giving him a sort of a half smile, but he could see the doubt in her pale eyes. Her face clearly said, "I know what you're doing, and I appreciate it, but it's not really working." Over the past 3 years they had learned to read each other almost perfectly. He smiled ruefully at her, realizing that they both knew what was going on. He finished his tea in one gulp, then swung one leg over the railing so that he could set his cup down on the ground. Reaching for Hinata, he pulled her down the rail towards him, until she was resting against his chest. He wrapped his arms tightly around her and stared at the mountains over the top of her head. "I don't like this," he said, pouting. He still had a tendency to act like a child when dealing with too many conflicting emotions. Hinata sighed and buried the side of her face into his shoulder. The only person they had had any contact with for the past 3 years was the fifth, and the letters they had received had been far from illuminating. 3 years was a long time, long enough that any number of things could have happened. Hinata frowned into her love's shoulder. Enough things had certainly happened to them. Swanda sighed and held her head in her hands. She had to get him out of the village. It was the only way to keep him safe. Orochimaru they could deal with now that they had the alliance with the sand. Jiraiya knew his patterns fairly well, and barring a disaster, they could counter him now that they knew he was on the move. Itachi, however, was another matter. They knew virtually nothing about him and his associates. She really had no way to guarantee Naruto was going to be safe as long as he was in Leaf. Too many people came in and out of the village. There was no way to keep tabs on the boy at all times, and there was always the risk that he was going to get taken while on a mission. They had stopped them once, but how often were they going to be able to do so again? If they tried to take him in his sleep? If they threatened his friends? She had to get someone to take him away, far, far away from the village where he could be trained, but protected. She needed him under the tutelage of someone no one would expect, someone no one would think of to look for. Someone that Itachi would hopefully know nothing about. The person before her, sitting in the chair in front of her desk, legs swung over one side and arms stretched across the back, was the perfect choice. But she was being so goddamn stubborn. "No," she said simply, and ate another of the chocolates she had sitting in her lap. "Please, Sora-chan, don't chan me and no." Her large pale, violet eyes showed no sign of remorse or guilt about turning her former teacher down. Swanda sighed. "All I'm asking is that you keep this boy safe until I can keep him safe. Considering all that I've done, that is not all you are asking me to do, Oba-san. You are asking me to take a 13-year-old boy with me, to my home, train him, keep him safe from a group of crazies who want to take over the world, and put up with him trying to convince me to come back and become a good little leaf neen." She shook her head, popped another chocolate into her mouth. "Not a chance in hell." Swanda switched tactics. "I think you two would get along rather well. You have a lot in common." Sora looked at her incredulously. "What can we possibly have in common? He's a 13-year-old boy." She looked at Sora over pressed fingertips. "And having known you at 13, I can honestly say you are a lot alike. He's sort of like you with a sunnier outlook." Sora snorted and ate another chocolate. "I can't imagine myself with a sunnier outlook." "Then you should meet him. He's a sweetheart, but he doesn't quite fit in here." "Oh, so he's going to fit in with me?" Swanda heaved a frustrated sigh. "Sora-chan, there is no other way. Send him with that perverted guy again. I need that perverted guy here in order to help defend the village. Besides, he's key to keeping tabs on another enemy." "What about the kid's normal teacher? He's off doing missions. My forces are depleted right now. I don't have any leaf neen to spare. I'm at my wit's end trying to cover all our missions right now. Besides, no one is able to stay off the map the way you are. I know if I send him with you, I won't have to worry about him being found. Sora shook her head again, and laughed lightly. You are not going to get me to pity you enough or flatter me enough to take this boy on. It's amazing you think I would even consider it. She rolled her eyes. Please don't tell me you called me to this godawful place just to ask me to do something that any sane person would know I wouldn't do. Swanda sighed. The scar on your shoulder. The woman shifted uneasily in her chair. Yeah? What about it? You told me once that it was the remains of a seal that had been broken. Sora gave sort of a half shrug. So, I have a patient, a very important one, who had also been sealed. I want to look at yours so that I can see if I can figure out how it was broken. Sora shrugged, clearly not thrilled with the idea, but she lacked a good reason not to let Swanda look at her. Sure, why not? Would you come to his room so that I can compare them side by side? Sure. Popping the last of the chocolates into her mouth, she stood up then transformed herself into a rather indescript-looking chunin. Swanda rolled her eyes. What? Sora asked. I never go anywhere looking like myself. I attract too much attention. Maybe if you dressed a little less conspicuously. She pretended to consider this for a second. Nah. She opened the door and followed Swanda out of her office. Sora tried her best to look at ease with her surroundings, but the fact of the matter was that the village made her skin crawl. She hated these places, and this one had far too many memories attached to it. They entered the hospital, brushing past the information desk and up into the intensive care facilities. Swanda paused briefly at the nurse's station. Is there anyone in with Sasuke at the moment? The nurse nodded. Hi, Hokage-sama. The girl who always comes, Sakura. The girl had barely left his side since she got her, and apparently had been there for weeks before that. Well, she would just have to leave for a while. Swanda didn't know how long she would be able to keep Sora in the village, and she needed to at least get her to meet Naruto first. The boy's got a girlfriend. She's his teammate. The two walked past the guards and into Sasuke's room. He was still knocked out and the small, pink-haired girl beside him sat with a blank stare in her eyes. When they entered, she looked up at them with intelligent, but blank eyes. Swanda leaned down and placed one hand on her shoulder, as if she was a little girl. Sakura-chan. I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave for a while. Maybe you should go home. The girl looked like she was about to cry, then simply nodded and stood up. I'll wait outside. Sora dropped her illusion as soon as the girl had left the room. Gee, she has it bad. He's something of a local heartthrob, Swanda said. Really? Sora peered at him, clearly unimpressed. He's a Yukika. Top of his class. Sora looked up startled. Wait, this isn't the one who... She shook her head. No, this is his younger brother. He's been sealed by my old teammate Orochimaru. Sora shivered. Man, it sucked to be him. How'd he get to be here? When Itachi went after Naruto, Sasuke went after. Suddenly Sora's blood ran cold. Nero? She asked. Swanda nodded. That's the name of the boy I want you to take. Didn't I mention it before? Sora shook her head. They're friends? She asked. Swanda shrugged. They're teammates, rivals. Friends, although this one probably wouldn't admit it. Would you sit down here? In a half-daze, Sora moved to sit on the bed next to the boy, sweeping her braids off over one shoulder to expose the opposite one. There was a round mass of scar tissue on her left shoulder, an almost perfect circle of white spiderwebs. Let's get this over with, please. Sora stared at the boy lying next to her on the bed. Last member of his clan and sealed by Orochimaru. Maybe she should just kill him and spare him the pain. Swanda sighed and activated an analyzing jutsu, looking at the structure of the two cursed seals. They were similar, but Sasuke's was far more complex. She had expected this, but not this extent. Sora had been a little girl when she was sealed. How young Swanda didn't know, but it must have been at least 15 years ago. Considering that he liked to build off of what other people had done, it would make sense that Orochimaru's would be better. The lines of the seal extended inside their bodies from their shoulders into their brains. From there is wrapped down their spinal cords and latched onto all of the gates. However, where the lines were whole and smooth in Sasuke, wrapping around like thick cords, they were thin and cut in Sora. It was as if someone gradually extracted all the curse that they were able to, then simply chopped the rest up. It took direct chakra control on top of incredibly complicated medical jutsus, something that Swanda just didn't have the expertise to do. Seals were in the gray area between med-nin and genjutsu specialists. Whoever had removed Sora's seal was a med-nin, strong genjutsu user and incredible control specialist. She's dead, Sora said suddenly. I couldn't find her for you even if I wanted to. It took Swanda a moment to realize what she was talking about. Then she laughed quietly. Fate just didn't seem to be on her side recently. Suddenly, there was a commotion out in the hall. There was a crashing sound followed by a screaming voice. What? Oba-san isn't there? Naruto. This is a hospital, be quiet. Does she think she can cure Sasuke-kun? I don't know, would you just shut up, you loudmouth? Inside the room, Sora raised an eyebrow at Swanda. Who else but me calls you that? Swanda smiled. The best way to get Sora to take Naruto was probably to introduce her to Naruto himself. Naruto. I said you were a lot alike? The eyebrow inched higher. She stood and transformed back into the Chunin before peeking her head out the door. A blond boy stood with his back to her, yelling at the girl with pink hair. She looked like she was about to kill him. Oh yeah, she had it bad for this Sasuke boy. He turned around and started walking down the hall. Sora's breath caught in her throat. He looked just like, no. That was impossible. But with that name, Obasan, why are the crazies after him? Swanda had been deliberately avoiding this issue. She was worried that admitting that this boy had the demon fox inside him would only make Sora more resolved to leave without him. Sora was not a woman for complications. But if she was asking directly, she really didn't have much of a choice. He was the one the fourth put the seal on. Sora's eyes went wide as she looked back at the boy. Dear God, she was right. It was him. Mentally she stomped her foot on the floor. Ah shit, now she didn't really have a choice. She had to take him with her. Her conscience would never let her live in peace if she didn't keep him safe. She studied him for a minute, as he alternated yelling at the pink-haired girl and the nurse, both of whom were trying to shush him. He seemed to almost vibrate with energy. Swanda moved to stand beside her. Because of the demon, the village generally regards him as the enemy who killed most of their families. I can't explain how damaging the QB was to the village and they blamed him? Sora interrupted. Swanda nodded. He's been rather isolated from the rest of the village, but nothing seems to keep him down. Most people would choose a dark path when faced with his life. Sora suppressed a cringe. Where was that ass who was supposed to be taking care of him? Why wasn't he keeping the boy safe? Why wasn't he making sure the village was decent to him? She watched as Naruto accidentally knocked over a cart full of medical supply with a large gesture, then scrambled to pick it up. She shook her head. Dear Lord, 3 years. It wouldn't hurt to let Swanda stew for just a bit longer. He looks like nothing but a pain in the ass, she said, exiting the room and heading down the hall in the opposite direction. She heard Swanda start down the hall after her, then stop. Looking back, she saw that the boy had intercepted her. With his hands on his hips, he was glaring up at the woman, suspicion plainly visible on his face. She laughed softly to herself and turned the corner. It had been a long time since she had been in a hospital. She certainly would never permit herself to be checked into one, and she hadn't had a traveling companion for a few years. Still, they rarely seemed to change. This side of the mountains or the other, hospitals were the same. Same long white corridors, same antiseptic smell. She hadn't really missed anything. Mentally, she started sorting though the idea of having an apprentice. She'd never taken one on before. Then again, Nanashir had never taken one on before when she took Sora on. She supposed that made it even. It would probably be best to take him up to her house first. It was as safe a place to take him as any. There she could start putting him through his paces, see just how much her new. Your lack of control over your abilities is a disappointment, as is your lack of general sense. Sora froze at the voice. It sounded so much like her father it was chilling. She stepped back to look at the doorway where the voice was coming from. Gomen, father. The voice was quiet and trembling and almost abnormally high, as if the girl was about to burst into tears. You have potential. You have the blood of our clan running through your veins. You have the education both from our family and this village, yet, you show almost no ability or judgment. Gomen. The girl was definitely crying now. A Hyung who cannot use his or her abilities is useless as a leader. Perhaps we should formally move you out of that capacity. Sora quickly turned away from the door as the man exited. Looking back over her shoulder, she watched him leave, shoulders squared and long hair flowing behind him. She stuck her tongue out at him. Asshole. She looked back into the doorway. She couldn't see the girl, but she could hear her crying. She should leave. She should go back to Obasan, grab the boy and get out of here. Sora waged a quiet war with herself for a few seconds before she sighed and gave in to the fact that she was going to go in and talk to the girl. Why did pity always win out over sensibility? Quietly she slipped inside the room. The little girl was sitting in the hospital bed, knees pulled up and her head down. Her whole body was shaking with tears. Her feet were bare underneath her kimono. That struck another chord. Unless she was training, Sora had not been allowed to wear anything but a kimono when she was growing up. She looked like she was about 11 or 12, but something made Sora talk to her like she was a little girl. Hey, are you alright? The girl looked up suddenly, eyes brimming over with tears. Who are you? The white eyes startled Sora for a second. Then she smiled. Name's Sora. And you are? The girl swallowed. Hinata. Sora stuck her hand out, and Hinata hesitantly took it. Nice to meet you, Hinata. You okay? Hinata ducked her head and nodded. Sora waited for her to elaborate, then realized that the girl wasn't going to say anything. How did you end up here? Don't tell me you came for the food. Hinata blinked at this strange woman who was now sitting on the side of her bed. I got hurt in the Chunin exam. Really, what happened? Hinata looked away and didn't say anything. Apparently it was not an okay topic to talk about. It was probably what her father had been talking about. Okay. Well, are you better? At this, Hinata nodded. After the 5th came, she healed me, but she suddenly stopped talking. But you don't want to go home. Because of your father. Hinata looked back at her quickly. Sora shrugged. I happened to overhear. He wasn't being very nice. Actually, Sora had a few choice words she wanted to use to describe him, but she wasn't sure the little girl was old enough to hear them. Hinata shook her head violently. No. He's right, I should be stronger, I should be smarter, but I just can't seem to. She bust out into tears again. Sora sighed and reached out to pat the girl's back. She badly needed some confidence, and her father wasn't helping. Asshole. He probably thought he was helping her, making her stronger, but if this was it always had been, she rolled her eyes. This was the problem with clans, this was the problem with villages. They put too much strain on their shinobi. Poor girl was a casualty of too much pressure to always be the best, the brightest, the strongest. All this hellhole was doing was wearing her down. A thought crossed Sora's mind and she smiled slightly. Well, why not? 2 would be easier to train than 1. She could tell them to go train together, and leave her alone some of the time. Plus she was always up to waging war against asshole fathers. As long as she was doing good deeds, she might as well do more than 1. Improve her karma. Hey, Hinata, she started, but was interrupted by Tswanda banging the door open with fire in her eyes. Sora, you left me alone to fend off. Sora smiled brightly at the woman. Hey, oh bacon. I'll take the annoying one off your hands if you'll let me have this one as well. Hinata smiled. And that had been that, at least in Sora's mind. She was soon to learn that Sora was almost a force of nature in and of herself. Hinata's bags had been packed, Naruto had been called for, and the 2 of them had been sat down in Tswanda's office in order to discuss their new mission. It all happened very fast, barely 4 hours between the time she had been sitting in her hospital bed avoiding looking at her father, and the time she was standing outside the gates of the village to leave. Sora had wanted to get out of the village fast, leaving everything else to be rather hastily done. This is a Class A mission with 2 key components, Tswanda said, looking at the pair across her desk. The girl was so short her feet barely touched the floor, and she stared at her hands neatly folded in her lap, occasionally darting shy glances at the other 2 occupants of the room. The boy was almost beside himself. Class A. Haha, so you have finally realized my strength, right? He said, jumping up onto his chair and pumping his fist into the air. Tswanda furrowed her brow in exasperation and shot him an annoyed look. It's mainly a training mission, not dangerous at all. Naruto froze and looked down at her, confused for a moment. He was distracted for just long enough that he failed to notice that the dance he had been doing had caused the chair to start to tip over. He started windmilling his arms, but it was too late. He landed on the ground with a large crash. Hinata gasped. Naruto-kun, she said in a voice so soft Tswanda was barely able to hear it. The girl jumped off her chair and rushed to his side. Are you okay? Naruto stuck one hand behind his head and began to try and laugh the whole thing off. Yeah, I just tripped, you know. Tswanda could almost see reality descend onto the girl. Now that the shock was over, she had started to realize what she had done, blushed and quickly took her seat again. Tswanda watched the girl give Naruto another sideways glance as he sat back down on his chair and was suddenly struck on the realization that Hinata had a crush on the overly loud blonde boy. She should probably tell Sora. Then again, the woman would find out soon enough that she was going to be dealing with adolescent hormones. Serves her right for suddenly deciding she wanted to take Hinata along. This whole thing was not going to be easy to explain to the girl's father. As I was saying, this mission has 2 parts. The first is training. Sora is taking the 2 of you on as a personal favor to me. She is not Leafneen. In fact, I am fairly sure that she has never belonged to any village. You will be able to learn things from her that you would never be able to learn elsewise. From a girl? Naruto questioned. Tswanda rolled her eyes. Someday she would find out who had put these ideas into his head and jutsu away every bone in his body. Yes, Naruto. Sora is a very skilled ninja. She could probably rival Kakashi. NEH? Rival Kakashi-sensei? No way, I know what she is capable of, Naruto. I was one of the people who trained her. She is an extremely skilled and disciplined ninja, one you especially could learn a lot from. Naruto was about to risk his neck by standing up on the chair again to protest, when they heard a very soft voice. Hokage-sama? They both turned to the girl next to Naruto, who had almost been forgotten. Yes, Hinata? She tilted her head up just far enough to be able to look at the woman, shoulders forward and hands still clenched in her lap. What was the second part of the mission? She asked quickly. Tswanda smiled. The other part of your mission is to try and bring her back. Huh? Naruto said. Tswanda shook her head. As I said, Sora is a very good ninja. She would be a very valuable asset to Leaf should she decide to join our shinobi. However, Sora has never served a village. She has a rather poor view of them in general. Poor? Naruto questioned. Let's just say that she vowed never to serve a village. Your job is to change her mind. That is what makes this a Class A. This time Naruto did manage to stand back up in his chair. Nani? It's a Class A mission for trying to convince this woman to join us. I want to do something more dangerous. Send someone else, she sighed. Naruto, you are the only one I think might have a chance of doing this. Huh? Why? You managed to renew my faith in the villages. I had given up on the whole damn thing and now I am sitting back here as the Hokage. Sora will be a far tougher nut to crack than I, but I'm hopeful you can do it. She looked over at Hinata. I'm not sure why, but she seems to have taken a liking to you. Hopefully, you will be able to help bring her back as well. Hinata looked at her, her eyes suddenly wide. Naruto had been gone for weeks where he went to get the new Hokage. If this Sora was supposed to be even harder to convince, how long do we have? Swanda sighed. I'm not sure. I'll send for you if I need to, but considering how much you two could learn from here, I would like for you to stay there as long as possible. Hinata swallowed. There was a large heavy lump forming in the pit of her stomach. How long would that be? Swanda looked at her. The girl was smart. She was starting to realize that this probably wasn't as clean-cut as Swanda was making it out to be. Naruto just kept looking back and forth between the two, trying to figure out what was going on. Finally, Swanda spoke. She said she would take you for 3 years? Hinata's mind had gone into overload. 3 years. 3 years away from her father, her sister, and the pressures of the clan. 3 years away from Chunin exams, public displays of how poor a ninja she was, and being brought face to face with her shortcomings. 3 years with him. It was too much. It was as if someone had gone into her brain, taken her dreams and nightmares, kneaded them together and baked up into something that gave her feelings she couldn't even identify. Just him and her with an instructor neither of them knew. That meant he would look at her. That meant he would talk to her. And that would mean she would have to talk to him. She couldn't do that. It had been easier for her the last time she had tried, at the practice ground right before the Chunin exam, but that wasn't an indication of what was normal. She could still barely form complete sentences around her teammates. Something had taken over her mind when she had been talking to him that day. She felt like there was something she simply needed to tell him, and suddenly the words had coming slipping out with only the occasional small hitch. But that had been a miracle. And miracles rarely happened. She knew other girls would view this as a golden opportunity, the ideal situation away from all the pain and with someone who meant so much to her. But all she could think about was that she was going to spend the next 3 years making an idiot out of herself in front of him. She tried to focus her mind on the task in front of her. Just around the corner from where she stood, Kiba and Shino were waiting for her. Karina and her father had been informed by Swanda that she was leaving, but the task of telling her teammates had fallen to her. She was dreading it. They had always been so nice to her, no patient with her shortcomings. They had kept her safe on the few missions they had and seen her trough the second part of the exam. Now she had to tell them she was leaving, pretend that she was strong enough to go out on her own. She paused at the corner again, peeping just around it to see them. They stood there a good 4 or 5 feet apart, Shino leaning against the wall, while Kiba roughhoused a bit with Akamaru. Hinata smiled. She was really going to miss the dog. Suddenly, Akamaru stopped and sniffed the air, before giving a small quick happy bark. He turned around and started running to where Hinata was hiding. Realizing that she had been found and that she didn't have any chance to hide anymore, she stepped out from around the corner. Bending over, she picked the little dog up with a small smile and let him start licking her cheek. Hey, Hinata. You know, you're the only other person who does that too, Kiba said with a lopsided grin. She suppressed her guilt as she walked over to the pair, scratching Akamaru behind his ears. She felt decidedly safer with the puppy in her arms, and she wasn't about to let go. So, you're feeling better? Kiba asked. Hinata was only able to nod. Great, now we'll be able to go out on missions again. With all the Chunins and Jounins out, I'll bet we'll get some good ones now. Actually, I just got a mission, Hinata said in a very small voice. All right. They're already sending us out, Kiba yelled. He stopped suddenly when Hinata shook her head. It's just me. Shino raised one eyebrow over the rim of his glasses. They're sending you out on your own? His voice had a distinctively incredulous tone to it. Again Hinata shook her head. I'm going with Naruto. Kiba scrunched up his nose. Naruto? He said, that idiot? Hinata almost had her face completely buried in Akamaru's fur. It's a training mission. She looked up with the desperation written on her face. I can't say anything else, please don't ask. She looked as though she was at the point of tears. Okay, we won't ask anymore. Just how long do you think you'll be gone? Hinata's voice was so quiet that they were barely able to hear her. 3 years. What? Kiba yelled. Shino looked as surprised as he ever did, both eyebrows arched high on his forehead. 3 years? But they can't. He stopped when he saw Hinata's face. Her eyes were huge and her face so pale that it almost matched her face. She had messed it all up again. They were angry with her, but she couldn't figure out what she had done. She shouldn't have told them whom she was traveling with. She knew Kiba felt bad about losing to him. She should have broached the subject more gently, told them she was sad she was leaving them. But she was all frozen up and on the brink of tears. I'm sorry, she whispered, shoving a startled Akamaru back into Kiba's arms. Turning, she ran away, her eyes filled with water, but the tears not falling. Kiba started to go after her, but Shino's hand on his arm stopped her. What? He yelled over his shoulder. She needs to calm down. We should go see her in a few hours. Didn't you see her crying? She left because she was embarrassed. Give her a few hours and then we'll go talk to her. Kiba hesitated, then sharply nodded, yanking his arm out of Shino's hand. A few hours. He could wait that long. Then he would drag the information out of her, and go yell at whoever had assigned her to this mission with the blonde baka. Oh yeah? That was a good plan. What both Kiba and Shino failed to realize was that no one wanted out of Leaf Village more than Sora. Hinata barely had time to grab her bag before she was expected to be outside the gates, ready to leave. Naruto burst into Sasuke's hospital room, banging the door loudly against the wall. Nay, Sakura-chan. Guess what? The girl sitting by the bed turned to glare at him, never letting go of Sasuke's hand. Naruto, be quiet. Can't you see Sasuke is trying to sleep? She whispered loudly. He scooted around the end of the bed to stand next to Sakura. Gomen, but you will never guess what happened. He started to launch into an account of his day, starting off with having ramen for breakfast and moving through everything he'd done. This was his chance to impress her. It wasn't so much about making her his girlfriend anymore. Almost a year spent on this Genin team had made him realize that friendship was what he had really been looking for. Not that he wouldn't go out with Sakura in a second if she said yes, but until the day he got her to acknowledge that he was excellent boyfriend material, he would be content to be her friend. If only she would realize how much stronger he was, how much better he was then from when the teams first formed. So he babbled on, trying to impress her with his new Class A mission. He was oblivious to the fact that Sakura wasn't listening. Sakura sighed and looked at the boy in the bed. She didn't really care what Naruto was talking about. All of her attention was focused on the boy in the bed beside her. She has been sitting next to his bed for nearly a week, watching him surface occasionally, only to dive back into sleep again. His hand in hers was too cold and clammy, but she kept holding on. He would never let her do this when he was awake. She was desperately worried about him. She still hadn't told anyone about the cursed seal. Suddenly the words Class A mission penetrated through her thoughts. Wait, what? She said, turning her head to Naruto sharply. I told you, he said. Obaken is sending me on a Class A mission. Explaining it had gotten him more and more excited. It was as if he hoping to sweep Sakura up in his enthusiasm. You, she said incredulously. Naruto fought to keep his face from falling as his heart crashed through the floor. It wasn't fair. He worked so hard, yet the people who mattered most never seemed to see. He was always going to be the same bumbling idiot in their eyes. He smiled through his disappointment. Yeah, me and Hinata. But I gotta go. He ran to the door, then turned around to grin at her. Tell Sasuke bye for me when he finally wakes up. See you in 3 years, Sakura-chan. And he went through the door and bolted down the hall. Wait, what? Sakura yelled, jumping out of her chair and scrambling down the hall. Naruto Yubaka, get back here! But he was gone. A woman at the nurse's station looked at her reproachfully. Miss, please, this is a hospital. People are trying to sleep, Sakura yelled at the woman in her head as she stared down the hall. What did he mean 3 years? Jiraiya leaned in close to Sora and smiled at her. You know, I trained Naruto for a while. Oh really? Sora said, inching away. She didn't want to do anything to this guy. He was pitiful enough as it was. But if he tried anything. Oh yeah? I did something very similar to what you're doing. Took him on the road, showed him the world. He draped one arm over her shoulder. She quickly ducked under it and pulled away. Dear God, was he always like this? How did Obaken put up with it? You know, I could give you a few pointers on how to manage the boy. Why the hell did that sound like a preposition? I think I can handle him, thanks. Was he actually wiggling his fingers at her? Are you sure? There was a definite lecherous tone in his voice and his hands were most defiantly heading towards her breasts. Okay, that was it. End of conversation. She brought her hands up around his neck and watched him go bug-eyed for a moment. Then she simply brought his head down as she brought her knee up. He doubled over in pain, wheezing harshly. She smiled and walked off towards where Tswanda was having a conversation with a black-haired woman. Sometimes the simplest moves were the best. My God, is he always like that? Sora asked, walking over to Tswanda, who was talking with a dark-haired woman. The woman smiled at Sora a little hesitantly. Sora suddenly remembered that this was Hinata's teacher, and she was probably a little hesitant to give her up. Good. Hinata's father had been far too easily convinced. Huh? Oh, Jiraiya. Yes, unfortunately. Tswanda gave her a wicked smile. You should be gal, you still look like that. If you looked like your usual self he would have assumed. Sora rolled her eyes. Enough about the outfit already, Obaken. The woman looked confused. What about her outfit? Tswanda sighed. You wouldn't have to ask if you saw what she is actually wearing. Kurenai raised her eyebrows. You have an illusion spell on at the moment? That impressive. I really can't tell. Sora shrugged. I have a lot of practice. Plus I learned from the best. Obaken has been covering her age since the first wrinkle. She looked thoughtful for a second. Then again, if I looked like she did, I would probably do the same thing. Tswanda rounded on her, eyes burning. Why you? Nay. Are you our new sensei? Sora looked over at the short blonde boy. Naruto? The boy nodded vigorously. She looked behind him and saw the shy girl with the wide pale eyes. Oh good, you're both here. Great, let's go. She started to walk off. Wait! Yelled Tswanda. Sora looked back over her shoulder. What? She said in apparent confusion, which Tswanda was fairly certain she was faking. I want a word with you before you go. Besides, you should give the kids the chance to say goodbye to their teachers. Sora rolled her eyes. Fine, just make it fast. I really want to get out of here. Swanda walked over to Sora and started talking to her in a low voice. It took 30 seconds for them to start arguing. Naruto walked over to where Jiraiya was still curled in a ball on the ground, breathing heavily. Watch out for that one kid, she's dangerous. Probably just got what you deserved, he said with a snort. Suddenly Jiraiya's face went serious. Look kid. I know Swanda, and if she says that this Sora is good, then she's good. Get as much out of her as you can. Yeah, and kid, yeah, take good care of the girl. Swanda says she has healed, but she's probably still scared. Naruto grinned. Yeah, well, she's a girl. I'll protect her. Jiraiya grinned back. Good. Then, once she trusts you, you can move on and end act. Suddenly all of the air came out of his lung as once thanks to the force provided by Naruto's kicks to his side. Hey Ero-senin. I'm not a pervert like you. Leaving Jiraiya is yet another trembling mass on the ground, he turned and walked over to Hinata. Kurenai was crouching down so that her head was even with Hinata's. Just have more confidence in yourself, and don't panic. That's when you start making mistakes. Hinata just looked at her feet and nodded her head. Kurenai sighed. Swanda says that Sora is a former student of hers, and that she will keep you safe. Nay, you don't have to worry about that. I'll keep Hinata safe. Hinata looked up at Naruto, pale eyes wide and full of awe. Naruto, however, was unable to see them. He was grinning so wide that his eyes were closed. Suddenly Kurenai had a very bad feeling about this. What if he broke her heart? The poor girl had been through enough. The last few months especially had been an emotional roller coaster. What would happen if the boy accidentally hurt her? Nay, Hinata, let's go, he said, grabbing her arm and starting to pull her off towards Sora and Swanda. Hinata just let herself be dragged along, as if she wasn't really sure what was going on. Kurenai sighed. Swanda said that Hinata's inclusion had been instrumental in gaining Sora's participation. Without her, Sora wasn't going to take Naruto. No matter how much it worried her, she had to let Hinata go. She would just have to trust to fate. Naruto stopped short a few feet away from the two women. Every 3 months, Sora said firmly. Every week, Swanda said just as firmly. That's over 150 reports. Every other month. Every other week. Fine, once a month. I am absolutely not writing anymore. Swanda sighed. Fine, once a month, but you had better write every single one. Don't worry. Sora turned to Naruto and Hinata. Already then? Good, that means we can finally get this show on the road. She smiled at Swanda and gave her a quick hug. See you in 3 years, sensei. Flashing another quick smile, she started to lead the threesome down the road, away from Hidden Leaf. Naruto and Hinata started taking quick glances back at the village over their shoulders. The reality of 3 years was finally starting to sink in and weigh heavy on their shoulders and hearts. Sora turned around and started to walk backwards, waving at the 3 teachers who stood watching them go. Goodbye, O Bacon. Don't forget the reports. Every 6 months, I remember. Every month. Right, I won't forget. And with that they were over the crest of the hill and out of sight. Kurenai looked at Swanda. I'm sorry, Hokage-sama, but are you sure this is a good idea? Swanda started at the place where had just disappeared. It's either going to be exactly what all 3 of them need or an unmitigated disaster. Hinata looked at the ground, up at Naruto and down at the ground again. She wanted to say something to him. It wasn't that she had anything specific in mind, but she wanted to be able to hold a pleasant conversation for a few minutes. It was more than she had ever been able to do before, and it would mean so much to her if only. Nay, Hinata? Hinata jerked her head up. She hadn't thought out yet what she would do if he talked to her. Oh no, what was she supposed to say? She swallowed. Hi, Naruto-kun? He leaned over close to her, causing her heart to speed up. Does Sora-sensei seem a little strange to you? He whispered. No, she seems nice, but, strange, he finished for her. She doesn't seem like any kind of ninja to me. Hinata had no idea what to say. No, well, Hokage-sama seems to think that Hinata broke off when she realized that Naruto was no longer next to her. He had run ahead and was now walking next to Sora. Sora looked down out of corner of her eye. The blonde kid was staring up at her suspiciously. Can I help you? They had been walking along in silence for nearly an hour. Sora was perfectly happy about this. It was a beautiful afternoon, the birds were singing, and every step she took was taking her father away from Leaf Village. She had already decided that when 3 years were up, she was sending them back on their own and not stepping another foot inside a hidden anything village. 3 years was what she had been given and 3 years was what she was giving. No more and no less. And absolutely no agreement to return as a shinobi. Things looked pretty good at the moment. But apparently her new apprentices didn't share that opinion. Are you really any good? Sora shrugged. Yeah, Naruto's eyes narrowed some more. Better than Kakashi-sensei? Kakashi? Why did that name sound so familiar? Who's he? Naruto's eyes went wide. You don't know about Kakashi-sensei? Copy Ninja Kakashi? TSA, I knew you couldn't be any good. Sora ignored him and kept rolling his name over and over in her head. Kakashi, it was such a familiar name, and she couldn't help but feel like it meant something to her suddenly. She hit on it. She turned to Naruto. Wait, Kakashi, gray hair, gray eyes, always wears a mask over his mouth. Yeah, that's him. He's my team leader, and everyone knows he's a genius. Sora let out a short burst of laughter and kept walking. Naruto waited for her to explain, but it didn't look like she was going to. Sora could hardly believe it. Kakashi-kun, God, she hadn't thought about him in years. You didn't answer my question. What? Oh, about Kakashi. She shrugged again. I think we'd probably be pretty evenly matched. I just recently started hanging around this part of the world again, so it's been a while since I've seen him fight. Naruto still looked very suspicious. I know, Sora-sensei? Sora smiled down at the girl who had come to walk on her opposite side. Hi, Hinata-chan. Where are we going? To my house. It's on the border, way up in the mountains. I've got a great view. And we're going to train there? She managed to get out. Yeah, for the most part. I might take you out exploring for a while. Haven't really decided yet. Oh. They continued walking in silence, Hinata fiddling with her fingers, Naruto looking very disgruntled and Sora walking along with a slight bounce in her step as if she hadn't a care in the world. Finally Hinata looked up at her again. Ano, Sora-sensei? Yes, Hinata-chan? Ano, why was the Hokage-sama complaining about your clothes? Sora blinked and looked down at herself. She let out a short laugh. Sorry, forgot I still looked like this. And she released the jutsu and kept on walking. About 5 steps later she realized that her 2 companions were no longer next to her. She turned around to find them stopped in the road, staring at her. What? Shinobi were sometimes on the fringes of fashion, but Sora left them all behind. Neither Naruto nor Hinata had ever seen anything quite like her. She was tall, probably just a little shorter than Kakashi-sensei with black hair that reached down her back. The thing was, it had all done up into hundreds of small beaded braids, many of which were dyed red or purple. She was wearing a long black coat with large silver clasps, boots, fishnets, a short back skirt, and a fitted red top which came up high around the back of her neck and plunged low in the front. The only thing she wore that indicated that she was a ninja was her fingerless gloves with metal plates sewn on the back. She didn't seem to have any forehead protector anywhere. There was a stud in her nose and several odd twists of metal working their way up the outside of her ear. Paired with her oval face and classic features, she made an odd picture. What? She repeated. Ano, is that what you really look like, Sora-sensei? Hinata asked hesitantly. Sora looked down at herself, and then back at the pair. Generally. It tends to attract a lot of attention, so most of the time I transform when I'm away from home. Makes life easier. Hey, what do we have here? Sora rolled her eyes and gave her students a see what I mean look. She plastered a fake grin on her face, and turned around to face the men. There were 3 of them standing about 15 feet away from her and smirking. They were muscular and clearly used to getting their way. If the way they leered at her were any indication. She continued to smile while inwardly she groaned. She hated assholes like this, leering at her. She continued to smile brightly. Can I help you, gentlemen? Their smirks increased. Actually, we were wondering if there was anything we could do to help you. They were coming closer and fanning out slightly around her. One of them, a rather bearish-looking man with ruddy hair, came up close to her. She refused to step back. A lone woman and 2 kids traveling without an escort can be in danger on these roads. He laid a clammy hand on her shoulder. She quickly lifted it off. Oh, I'm sure we'll be fine. Are you sure, sweet cakes? We would be happy to escort you wherever you're going. Another one who looked rather serpentine came up behind her and put his hand on her, grabbing and digging his fingers in. Lovely young lady out here by herself dressed up like that is asking for trouble. What are you doing out here all by yourself anyway? The third one asked. Quickly she removed the man's hand from her hip and ducked out from within their circle. Oh well, I'm just on my way home. And the kids? She was still hoping to get out of the situation without a fight. Saying they were her apprentices wouldn't work. They would decide to test their ability against her, thinking they could win easily and brag about how they had gotten an uppity little ninja girl from the leaf. She still had hopes for defusing the situation, but it had to happen fast. My little brother and his girlfriend, Naruto, and Hinata paled. What was she saying? She seemed to be almost trying to dance her way out of the conflict. Naruto scowled. She couldn't be that powerful then. If she was, she would have just fought them. He would have to protect them. The third man finally took a good look at the 2 apprentices. Hey look, the kids have leaf forehead protectors. They ninjas? Sora groaned inwardly. Damn it, she had forgotten to have the kids take those off. There was no way to work around it. They might have been quiet when she called Naruto her brother, but he wasn't going to stand for her saying he wasn't a ninja. Yes, the man slowly started approaching Naruto and Hinata. Well then, maybe we ought to see what the kids can do. Give them a little real-world training. Naruto glared at him. Bring it on. I can take all of you, Naruto-kun, Hinata said as he stepped in front of her to keep her separate from the approaching man. Sora held her hand up as if trying to placate them. Gentlemen, please. It's hardly nice to attack 2 partially trained young ninjas. Worried about your little brother? The bearish man sneered. Say, if you're his big sister, then you must be a ninja too, right? Nah, a little punk like her couldn't be a ninja, said the man hovering over Naruto and Hinata. Yeah, you're right. Probably can't keep a thought in her head long enough to even pull off a decent jutsu. Can you sweet cakes? Sora's eyes narrowed, but her smile stayed the same. Insult her clothes, insult her virtue, and she would brush you off. Insult her ability and threaten her charges. You wouldn't know what hit you. She brought her hands together, and ran quickly though a series of seals. Finally she stopped on Ram and Sing San's chakra bind no jutsu. Light blue light with just a hint of purple started pulsing from her hands. With almost blinding speed, she rammed the palm of her hand into each of their chests. It was over in almost half an instant. The men simply dropped around her feet. She smiled down at them pleasantly, and nudged one of them in the side with her boot. All of you out? Good. With a small sigh, she transformed into a woman a few years older than Naruto and Hinata, with a plain kimono and an even plainer face. Come on you two, we have a lot of ground to cover before nightfall. Naruto and Hinata were still standing there stunned. Actually taking a man, even a weak man, out with one blow was hard, and to do it 3 times in a row the Hyungs were able to do it because of their ability to stop the flow of chakra. But this woman was no Hyuga. In fact, to Hinata's eyes what she had done looked very similar to her Byakugan. But how had she? Hey, are you two going to stand there all day? Sora called out over her shoulder. Nay, sensei, you probably shouldn't call me that. I prefer not to attract attention on the road, and 2 ninjas following me around calling me sensei is going to do just that. Call me Wani-chan instead. We'll keep pretending that you're my brother. Hinata stared at her. Did this mean that she was going to keep referring to her as Naruto's girlfriend? She started blushing. How would she be able to handle that? Nanny? Why do I have to be related to you? It's the best ploy to avoid conflicts. And take those head protectors off. Naruto looked truly shocked. How could she expect him to do that? This was his symbol of his existence as a ninja. He had worked too hard to get it to simply stop wearing it. No! He yelled. Hinata cringed. She hated it when people yelled. She always felt so helpless. She wanted to be able to defuse the argument, to simply step in between Naruto and Sora, but she realized that it wouldn't do any good. People tended to forget she was there even when there wasn't an argument going on. If there was an argument, she simply had no hope of being noticed. Sora rolled her eyes, but kept the light humor in her voice. You just have to take it off until we get home. I am simply trying to avoid having to fight more people than I have to. Didn't the woman understand? He needed to bet stronger, and fighting was the only way to do it. Otherwise, how was he going to get people to acknowledge him? How was he going to get Sakura to see him as more than an idiot? How was he going to become Hokage? He only had 2 things that he needed to do, train and fight. Those 2 things were what he needed to do in order to reach his dreams. But I want to fight, she scowled at him. She stopped walking and turned to face him, her tone suddenly taking on a serious quality for the first time. First of all, if the Leaf Ninja Academy is not teaching you that fighting should be avoided rather than sought, then I am going to have a word with Obacon. If you think that fighting random guys who harass us on the road will make you a better ninja, then you are too stupid for me to train. Taking those men out would have proven nothing, but you took them out, only because I had to or they were going to attack you. I could have handled it. Those idiots were no match for me. Sora felt like she was going to scream. Look, kid, I have fought more people in my lifetime than most of the shinobis back at that village of yours. If I say it's not going to do any good, it's not going to do any good. Don't just attack anyone. Save yourself for the enemies that count. That's the first thing. Second, as long as you are studying under me, you will follow my rules, my guidelines and my orders. That includes avoiding conflict and calling me Wani-chan in order to do so. Clear? Naruto just snorted and turned away. She stared at him for a few minutes. Then he reached up and took off his forehead protector, stuffing it into his bag. Sora decided to accept that as a yes. They stopped in a village with one small and where they rented a room for the night. The room was plain, but clean, with dark wood walls and a single large window that looked out onto the forest. Sitting in their room eating the last of their dinner, Hinata decided to try her courage at asking Sora a few questions. In order to bring her back, they probably needed to know why she didn't have a village. I know, Sora-sensei? Sora sighed. She was beginning to see a pattern in Hinata's speech. Hi, Hinata. Hinata tried to think of an innocent-sounding question. Where are you from? And so the questioning begins, Sora thought. She had to be careful here. She didn't want to lie to them, as she didn't want to give them reasons not to trust her. But there were things that they would never be able to know. Nowhere in particular. I've traveled a lot. I know, so then, who trained you? I mean, I know that Hokage-sama. She just sort of trailed off. Sora smiled and wondered how she was going to be able to boost the girl's confidence. I had one teacher before Obacon, and after I finished training with them, I traveled around with a partner for a while. Where is he? Sora let out a short snort. She's married. About 3 years ago she met a man, fell in love, and they ended up married and farming of all things. I still can't believe it, she smiled. They have the sweetest little girl on the face of the earth. Really? Hinata asked with interest. Naruto just sat there and kept eating his ramen. This was an extremely boring conversation. There was a faraway look in her eyes. 2 years old and cute as a button. They're my family and they offered to let me stay with them, but I wasn't about to become a farmer. Her voice suddenly got very quiet. Too many things left undone. Hinata looked confused. What do you mean, Sora-sensei? Sora smiled. Everyone has things they want to get done. I have a few more things left on mine to get done before I settle down. Hinata was relieved. She looked back at Hinata and smiled, immediately brightening. How about you, Hinata-chan? What's on your to-do list? What do you want to with your life? Well I guess I want to. Hinata stopped and looked up at Sora with wide eyes. I don't know. I guess I want to be a good clan leader. You're the heir? Hi booty, I'm not. I see. You don't think you're good enough. Hinata nodded and continued to stare at the floor. On Jujutsu, she looked over longingly at Naruto, who continued to eat, not paying attention to either of them. Shit. She was in love with them. Sora must have been blind to not notice it before. She groaned inwardly. This was going to make everything so much more complicated. Shit. Why hadn't anybody warned her? She was going to have to figure out a way to get this out of the girl's system and fast. Otherwise they were going to be untrainable. What about you, Naruto? He said, looking back at them over his shoulder. Naruto, pay attention. Your teammate over here started quizzing me on where I was from in a move I am sure had to do with making me a leaf shinobi. While you two are not going to succeed in that, you are still leaving to work of trying up to her, which isn't very nice. We then started talking about things we wanted to do without lives. It helps me to know your goals when I train you, so out with it. What do you want to do? Naruto grinned broadly. I am going to be Hokage. Sora stared at him. She had managed to get the overly shy and unconfident heir to one of the most powerful bloodlines in the world who was in love with a loudmouthed kid with a demon fox sealed in his navel and delusions of becoming Hokage. And they were hers for the next 3 years. She was going to kill Obeiken when she got the chance. Naruto finally decided that learning how to do that thing Sora had done to the men on the road would be worth the embarrassment of having to ask a girl. Nay. Teach me how to do that thing you did, the Churka bind? She chucked down at him from where she sat perched in the room's only chair. You've got a long way to go before you can do that. That was what Jiraiya said about teaching me Rasengan. But I got it. Sora arched her eyebrows. You can do Rasengan? Naruto nodded his head vigorously. Sora was impressed, but she wasn't about to let it show. Did you learn it all at once, or did you take it in steps? Naruto scowled. Well, steps, but I did them really quickly. Good, then you should be able to get the list. She reached for her pack and started rummaging through it. She always carried the list with her, although it wasn't particularly useful. She hadn't opened it in years, but just knowing that it was a reminder of who she was, who she had made herself to be, she hadn't initially planned on using it with them. It was heavy-duty training which built the foundation for far more advanced things. Still, she was hoping it would do 3 things: calm Naruto down, build up Hinata's confidence, and force them to work out any personal stuff before she started really working with them. If working side by side trying to figure things out together didn't cement their relationship into some form, nothing would. She tossed the scroll in the air once before catching it and handing it to Naruto. Hinata-chan, you should look at this too, indicating that the girl should move closer to the boy. Hinata hesitantly scooted across the floor to where he was sitting cross-legged. Hesitantly, she looked over his shoulder. The boy turned the scroll over in his hands, peering at it. What is it? A list of 100 things every ninja should be able to do, Sora said with a grin. My first teacher gave it to me to learn. Now you get to. Naruto said, and opened the scroll while Hinata looked over his shoulder. Across the top was written 100 basic skills and it was followed by a list of 100 different techniques. Some of them were Churka control techniques. Climbing trees and walking on water were both there. Some were actual justice, but none of them were anything he had ever learned or even ever heard of. What the hell was Dishes no Jutsu? As they read down the list, something suddenly occurred to Naruto. Nay, Sora. I told you to call me One-chan for a reason. Yeah, but there is nothing you can use in a fight in this. No, of course not. Naruto jumped to his feet. What do you mean of course not? It's a skill set. These are 100 things you need to be able to do in order for me to teach you anything. She shrugged, something that was really starting to irritate Naruto. Until you learn those, there is nothing I can really do. Nanny? But some of these things don't make any sense. Oh, if you have questions, I'll be glad to help you. But I'd like for you two to work through it on your own. So once we're mastered it, we can start combat training? She seemed to consider this for a second. Yes, all right. I'll get through this list in no time. She smirked and leaned back in the chair. Don't you mean we? Nanny, you both have to get through the list before I'll teach either of y'all anything. Nanny? Well, I certainly don't want to have to teach the same thing twice. Makes more sense for me to just wait and teach you both at the same time. But I already know how to do some of this stuff. Then teach Hinata. She waved her hand at them in a dismissing gesture. You two sort it out between yourselves. I'm going to bath and go to bed. She got up from the chair and left the room, presumably headed for the bathhouse. Hinata and Naruto looked at each other, and then at the scroll he held in his hand. Nay, Hinata. Do you know how to climb trees? Okay, so you concentrate your chakra on your feet and then just run up the tree. Hinata blushed and looked confused. They were standing in the forest a few miles away from the village where they had spent the night. At Naruto's insistence, they had woken up early and left to train. He was determined to get through this list as soon as possible. There were 100 things to learn, and if they did one task per day it would take them 100 days or just a little over 3 months. It was still a long time to spend learning things he couldn't use, but he had 3 years to learn the chakra bind. Hinata looked at the tall tree in front of her. She was determined, she could do this. She had done other exercises similar to this back in Leaf with her team. Plus she had been gathering chakra to her hands since the moment she had been old enough to be put into a training uniform. This was just a matter of gathering it to her feet, she kept telling herself. Naruto watched as Hinata ran towards the tree. Suddenly, she caught sight of him out of the corner of her eye, looking at her expectantly. She hit the tree, took 10 steps up and then slid down, landing with a large thump. Suddenly Naruto had the feeling that this was going to take longer than he had hoped. They both stared at the tree. She could tell that he had thought she would do better. She had thought she would do better. Hinata started to feel even more nervous. What if she couldn't do this? Naruto frowned. Maybe she was just warming up. Nay, it's okay, Hinata. Try again. Hinata bit her lip and nodded. Standing up, she walked a few paces back and concentrated her chakra. Then she started running. She made it 7 steps up the tree before she overdid it and got pushed off. Quickly she slashed into the tree. She hadn't even made it up as far as the first time. She felt pathetic. Without waiting for him to tell her anything, she got up and ran towards the tree again. 7 steps. Again. 5 steps. 7 again. 10. 8. Over and over again she tried. She tried to block out the fact that he was there. He was making her so nervous she couldn't concentrate. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't forget that he was there. This was just like how she would mess up in front of her father. No matter how many times she tried to climb the tree, she never got beyond 10 steps. Panting, she sat down on the ground. Naruto was puzzled. He had thought girls had some sort of special ability to climb trees. Sakura-chan had done it the very first time she tried. That's weird, Sakura-chan didn't have a problem. His voice trailed off as he thought it over. Hinata sat on the ground crushed. She knew that he liked Sakura. He had been chasing after her for months, trying to get her to go out on a date with him. She could see why he liked her. She was pretty and smart. Hinata couldn't do anything right, and Naruto himself had described her as dark and strange. She could see it in his eyes, the disappointment at how poorly she was doing. She was holding him back, preventing him from moving forward. Without her along, with things going the way that the Hokage had wanted, he would have easily completed the list. With her, he might not even be able to complete it in 3 years. Suddenly it all became too much for her. He was so close and she wanted so badly to be able to prove to him that she could do this. But she just couldn't. She wished the ground would just come and swallow her up. She was just as useless here as she was at home. She was stupid, she was useless, and unfitting to be both heir to her clan or a shinobi of the leaf. She suddenly broke down into tears. Naruto was shocked. He tried to remember if he had ever seen a girl cry before. He couldn't think of a time. Yes, Sakura had cried a couple of times when she had gotten hurt on a mission, but that was nothing like this. Hinata was shaking hard, her sobs coursing through her entire body. Her face was buried in her hands, but Naruto could see the tears leaking through between her fingers. Tentatively he walked towards her, one hand extended to touch her lightly on the shoulder. She jerked back at his touch, which brought her flat up against the tree. She slid down it and buried her face in her knees. Naruto crouched down in front of her. Nay, Hinata, I'm sorry. It's just, she said, choking on her tears. It's just that I'm holding you back. I'm here, but I'm useless. I see can't do anything but hold me back, my friends. Naruto didn't know what to say. Was that really what she thought? That all she did was hold people back? Suddenly he remembered the day of the Chunin exam, the day that everything had happened. He had beaten Niji and then Gaara, controlled the demon inside him and saved Sakura. But when he had woken up that morning, he hadn't been sure he was able to do anything. Something about talking to her had made him feel better, more confident, and more like his old self again. Now all he had to do was figure out how to do the same thing for her. Nay, Hinata-chan? Hinata looked up from where her face had been buried in her knees. She sniffed loudly and stared at him with wide eyes, startled by how close he was. Remember when you kept picking yourself up off the ground when you fought with Niji? Hinata looked confused, but nodded. Well, that tree is easier to face down than him, he grinned. But I failed. Naruto shook his head. Nah. You kept getting up. He was the idiot who kept kicking you when you were down. Hinata stared at him, unable to fully take in what he was saying. She remembered him yelling at her to stand up during the Chunin exam. She remembered watching him from the very first days she had entered the academy. He had been a truly terrible student, always disrupting the class or sneaking out when he was bored. They were both failures. People that got stared at for not being what they were supposed to be. But while it had crushed her, it had never seemed to dampen his spirits, until the day of the tournament, when suddenly she was able, for a few brief moments, to speak to him without stumbling over her words. Naruto-kun, she breathed softly. Nay, Hinata-chan, it took me a few days to get the tree climbing thing. Maybe that's all you need. Hinata looked up at him as if she was frozen in time. He wanted her to keep trying. He thought that she could do it. Did this mean that he didn't think she was useless? Suddenly she felt like laughing, something she hadn't done in a long, long time. She felt strangely happy. His presence no longer felt like a hindrance, but a help. She stood up and walked a few yards away before turning and running towards the tree. She made it about 20 feet up the side of the tree before she lost control over her chakra and started to slide back down. Quickly she slashed into the tree and pushed away to land neatly on her feet. It was at least twice as far as she had gone before. All right, Naruto yelled. Now we're getting somewhere. Try it again, Hinata-chan, she smiled. It was a start. Sora watched the pair from the branches of a nearby tree. It was almost 10, and she really should have all of them moving on their way at this point. However, she couldn't bring herself to break them up. They were making good progress. Amazingly good progress. She supposed that it had mainly been a barrier of confidence rather than skill which had prevented Hinata from climbing the tree. In order to utilize her blood limit, she would have to have excellent chakra control already. Still, the loudmouth's encouragement seemed to have been what she needed. She would be climbing trees no problem by the end of the day. She smiled and shook her head. Still, climbing trees was one of the easiest exercises on the scroll. It would be interesting to see how they fared with some of the more difficult ones where either of them knew what they were doing. Heaven knows they frustrated the hell out of her when she had been forced to do them. It seemed strange to her that her life would suddenly circle back to that time. She had always thought that she would train someone, but not under these circumstances and certainly not this pair. Now that she had the chance to watch them, she was almost eerily reminded of her phys teacher and her husband. She sighed and leaned her head back against the tree. The light danced through the leaves over her head. Nanashi-sensei, I hope this is what you would want. Naruto and Hinata sat facing each other on the grass underneath the tree. Hinata had figured out how to go about 50 steps up the tree before she lost control. That put her near the top of all but the very tallest of the trees. Now they were going through the list and checking out how many of them they knew. Naruto was disappointed to realize how few he knew. All my training and I only know 3 of the things on the list? Hinata bit her lip and looked at the ground. I know 2. Well, then that leaves you 95 to go. They looked up to see Sora leaning up against the tree. Considering how well you 2 did on the first one, it shouldn't take you too long. Naruto regarded her suspiciously. She was being entirely too nice. Sora walked over to them and looked down at the scroll. Which ones do you know? She asked. As Naruto was still staring at her, Hinata answered. Naruto knows the tree climbing, water walking and chakra spinning. I know how to push the chakra out from my hands and I can sort of do the level restoration. Sora was surprised. Level restoration was one of the harder ones on the list. It was a medical technique used to restore homeostasis in selected portions of the body. Really? Level restoration? Do you want to be a mednin? Hinata blushed. One of the mednins started to teach me. I can't really use it, but the idea helped me make healing balm. That stuff you gave me after my match with Kiba? Naruto asked. That stuff kicked ass. Sora hit him on the top of the head. Watch your mouth, kid. She turned back to Hinata. Do you have any of it with you? Hinata reached for her pack and quickly pulled out a small jar. Sora took it and quickly unscrewed the lid. Dipping her thumb and forefinger in, she rubbed them together, feeling the consistency of the ointment. Hinata watched in fascination as Sora's eyes suddenly went from a blue-violet to a deep purple, and then suddenly became shot through with lines of sliver. She had never seen eyes like that before. Then, just as quickly as it had happened, her eyes reverted to normal. Naruto's right, this is good stuff. Not only were the ingredients obviously carefully prepared, the chakra that had been put into the bomb had some of the neatest arrangements she had ever seen. She would have to get the girl to Yasu at some point during the next 3 years. They would get along like 2 peas in a pod. Suddenly Sora's thoughts ground to a halt. Why, all of a sudden, did training them seem more like a pleasure than a chore? She had barely had them under her care for a day. Surely she hadn't gone that soft. I know, Sora-sensei? Hinata looked at her questioningly. All of a sudden she had just started staring off into space. Sora shook her head to clear it. You should call me Wani-chan, too, Hinata-chan. Just to be safe. She handed the jar back to Hinata, then smiled at the 2 of them. Come on, kids. It's noon and we're not getting any closer. Naruto scrambled to his feet. Any closer to where? Sora smiled. Home. Where you get to train all day, every day. They were walking along the road, Sora in front, Naruto and Hinata trailing behind, when suddenly Sora turned off the road and went into the trees. Naruto and Hinata looked up from where Hinata had been trying to explain, unsuccessfully, how she pushed her chakra out of her hands. This way, you too, Sora called out from the trees. They looked at each other, and then followed their teacher into the forest. Ano, Wani-chan? Hinata called out. She started as Sora's voice came from behind her. Hinata-chan, do you start every question with Ano? Hinata blushed. Ano, why she stopped herself as she realized that what she had said. Sora laughed, but it was a kind laugh that invited Hinata to join in. Why? She prompted. Hinata swallowed. Why did we leave the road? Sora smiled. This is the way to my house. The next village is a few more hours down the road, but it will take less time to get home if we just go directly. From here on out, we can go ahead and use speed. Depending on how fast y'all can run, we should be there by the end of the day. Naruto for one was relieved. Sora had been forcing them to walk along like normal people for the past 5 days, claiming that it was essential to keeping the three out them under the radar. It was almost painful for Naruto to travel this slow. Jumping up into a tree, Sora looked down at them. You two coming? They followed her up into the trees and across the forest, farther away from the road and further up into the mountains. The scenery flashed by as they jumped from tree to tree, blurring greens and brown together. Suddenly, they stopped near the base of one of the mountains next to a broad cliff face. Here we are, Sora said. She started to take her gloves off, peeling back the Velcro straps around her wrist and tugging them off with the teeth. Naruto looked left and right, even behind him, in confusion before turning back to Sora. Huh! There's nothing here. That's because you just don't know where to look, Sora said with a smile. Shoving her gloves into the pocket of her jacket, she walked up to the side of cliff and started walking along it, looking up and down as if she was trying to find something on the face of the cliff. Suddenly she stopped and faced the wall. Stretching her arm up over her head, she shook her shoulders out quickly. Then she brought her hands together and started running through a long series of hand seals. Suddenly she stopped and started drawing symbols down the face of the cliff, beginning just above her head and ending at her waist. Naruto and Hinata watched in astonishment as her fingers left a trail of glowing purple behind it. Sora quickly pressed her hands together, made 2 quick seals and slammed her palms into the wall on either side of the line. A door-sized portion of the rock began to move backward into the cliff face, as if Sora was pushing it. Then it suddenly swung to the side, revealing an opening into the side of the mountain. Sora dusted off her hands and went inside. Naruto stared at the entrance, then looked at Hinata to see if she knew what to make of it. Hello? Is it just me or are y'all unusually slow today? Hey! Naruto yelled and stomped off into the hole, Hinata trailing behind. What the hell do you mean slow, he said, then started as the rocks slid shut behind them. Naruto heard Hinata take a sharp breath behind him. Hey! What's going? He was cut off by lights flickering on. Exposed bulbs overhead buzzed in the sudden quiet of the cave. Sora smiled. Welcome home, she said. Turning, she started to walk up a seemingly endless flight of stairs. Ano, Wani-chan, when you said you lived in the mountains, I didn't think. Hinata, we really need to work on the number of times you say Ano. In any case, I don't live in the mountain. I live on it. But this is the only way up. Naruto looked around at the stone walls. Why would anyone build a house like this? For security. As I said, the only way up is through this passage. The area around the house is rather cliffy. It's a nearly impossible position to attach en masse. But the main thing is that because there is no path leading up to a house, no one looks for a house. Huh! Naruto said. The house is surrounded, protected by an illusion. Unless you know it is there and what it looks like, you can't see it. Add to that the fact that most of the house isn't even visible from the ground. And why did you build a house with so much security? Sora smiled at the bitten off Ano. I didn't build it, my first teacher did. She said that if you were going to call something hidden, might as well actually make it hidden. She was grateful that it was Hinata asking these questions and not Naruto. She told herself that when she had to address questions about Nanashi-sensei, she would simply answer them and not swerve. However, she was finding it harder to do than she expected. Hinata was puzzled. Things were very rarely given the word hidden as part of their name unless they were the capital of a country. What's the name of the house? Generally, it's referred to as Sora's house. She turned to look at them over her shoulder and grinned. Hinata swore she saw pain in her eyes, but she couldn't be completely sure. Her plans never really materialized. Originally this was going to be the base for a new group of ninjas. Nani? A new group of ninjas? Naruto asked. Sora nodded. She didn't agree with the way the villages were being run. She hoped that by founding her own, she would be able to change things. What sort of things? Hinata asked. Sora shook her head. It's not really important. She was never able to start up the group. Why not? Hinata asked. Sora's eyes clouded in sadness. She died young. How did she die? Sora again shook her head. Look. I will never lie to either of you. You have to be able to trust me in order for me to teach you. However, there are some things I either can't or won't tell you. Those you have to simply let go. Hinata and Naruto were startled by her response. It was so straightforward and serious that it almost seemed out of character. Perhaps that was the reason they accepted it so easily. They followed another curve in the stairwell, and suddenly had their eyes filled with sunlight. Climbing up the last few steps into the open, they seemed to be on some sort of plateau. They had emerged in the middle of a small field covered in low grasses. The field sloped upwards gently, dotted with trees until it reached the house. Hinata and Naruto stopped and looked in amazement. The house was built into a tall, wide crevice in the face of the mountain. Three sides pressed up against the mountain wall with the fourth spilling out in a series of terraces. It was a traditional house with wide covered porches and green tile roofs. There was nothing ornate or fancy about it, but it was huge, rising at least 4 stories into the air. That's your house? Naruto yelled. Sora looked at him ironically. I told you a whole group of ninjas were supposed to live here. She built it for 150 people. She snickered. If you think the house is impressive, check out the view behind you. Naruto and Hinata turned and gasped. It was spectacular. To either side of them were the mountains, rising to snow-covered peaks. In front of them was the valley, laying out a patchwork of farmland as far as the eye could see. Wow! Yelled Naturo, running towards the edge of the field. Looking over the edge, he realized that it simply dropped off. They were on a plateau at the top of the cliff. There were hundreds of feet between him and the ground. This is so cool. Hey Hinata, come check it out. Hinata's eyes went wide and she stayed rooted in her place. She shook her head vigorously. She could tell from where she was that they were very high up off the ground. Naruto was bending over the edge in a way that made her very nervous. What if he fell, Hinata? She looked up at her teacher. When Yasu had Mickey 2 years ago, we warded the whole perimeter. He falls off, he falls 4 feet. Hinata smiled shyly, grateful that she hadn't had to confess her fears out loud. Yasu must be the partner who Wani-chan had mentioned. Hinata wondered what Yasu must be like. Wani-chan? Are we going to meet Yasu? Eventually. Her and her husband live near the village we bypassed. The next time we go to get supplies, we'll spend the night at her place. Sora turned and started walking up towards the house. Come on, Naruto! She yelled over her shoulder. Naruto looked up and scrambled up to run after them. Nay, Wani-chan. Do you live in this whole house by yourself? I only live in a portion of it. The rest I keep shut up. I'm afraid the 2 of you are going to have to clean out a couple of rooms for yourselves. She walked up the few steps to the huge front gate. This one she simply took a key out for and quickly turned the lock. It wasn't a castle, but it was close. It was obviously not built to impress. There was no grand entrance, no intricate ironwork. It was a house large enough to accommodate a small crowd, and that was it. The gate opened into a large courtyard, overshadowed by the house. The slate floor was scratched from weapons practices in the past. They crossed it and stepped up onto the first porch. Sora slid open the door and walked inside. Home sweet home, she said. The room was large and airy with a staircase on the far side leading up. Looked more like a modern family room pulled out someone's home than the entry room for a fortress. Run upstairs and dump your stuff, then come back down. Then I'll show you around. With a muttered hi, they ran upstairs. Quickly she moved to a table in back of the couch and grabbed 2 framed photos. Knowing she only had seconds until they came back, she shoved the pictures into a drawer. It would have to do until she could move them to her rooms. Her eyes stopped on a photo of her and Oba-chan just a few weeks after they had started traveling together. They were sitting at the counter of some restaurant, leaning together over plates of food while the chef took their picture. Is that the Hokage-sama? Sora looked up and scolded herself for not hearing the 2 of them come back. Hi. I'm a little bit younger than y'all here. This was taken just after I convinced her to let me travel with her, so I would have been 13. Naruto eyed the picture suspiciously. Is that really you? I know, it doesn't look much like me. I didn't start developing my own sense of style until shortly thereafter. She laughed softly. If I remember right, the day after that picture was taken I snuck out and got my nose pierced. Oba-chan was pissed. Naruto looked down the table of pictures. All your friends. Most of them are the same people, but at different ages. She started pointing out pictures. This is me as Yasu when we were in our teens, the 2 of us at her wedding and us and her daughter, Mickey. Naruto looked from one picture to the other. Sora stayed basically the same, but the other woman went from being a sex kitten with heavy white curly hair spilling over exposed shoulders to a woman with a bun and a little girl in her lap. That's the same person? Sora shrugged. She calmed down a great deal after she had Mickey. Hinata held one picture up to her. Who's this, Wani-chan? She swallowed. This is me and my first teacher. The one who built the house. She's beautiful. What was her name? She had to get it out. She had to make them think that there was nothing out of the ordinary. She breathed in. Nanisher. She looked over to gauge Naruto's reaction and was pleased to see that there wasn't one. He was still staring at the pictures of Yasu and her. Come on, you 2, I'll show you the house. The house was even bigger than it looked from the outside, but Sora only lived in a few rooms. She showed them the kitchen and dining room, which she said she never used, the living areas and the library, which she rarely used, but they were going to be using a lot. The bathhouse was at the top of the house and Sora spent a good 15 minutes lecturing Naruto on how he was going to peep on her or Hinata in the bath while Naruto yelled he was not a pervert, and Hinata blushed. Finally, they came to the bedrooms where she stopped. This is my room, she said, pointing to the door. Unless there is an emergency, you are not to come in here. And by emergency I mean emergency. Foreign ninjas invading the house. Not I can't sleep or I'm out of deodorant, and I need to borrow some of Sora's. Clear? They nodded. Good. Now if you will excuse me, I have a few things I need to attend to. Just pick out any room along here and start cleaning it out. I've used most of them for storage of various things, so you'll need to move things into empty rooms. Okay? They nodded again. Great. Just knock when you have the room cleared out. And with that she stepped into her room and closed the door. Naruto and Hinata stood there and stared at the door. Naruto snorted. What crawled up her skirt? Hinata giggled. I heard that. Sora yelled. I don't care if you did. Naruto yelled back. Naruto-kun, Hinata said softly, not expecting him to hear her. Huh? What Hinata? He asked. Hinata blushed and shook her head. Well, might as well get started looking at the rooms. He grabbed her arm and led her down the hall. He had done it a few times in the past week, and it always made Hinata blush. It was close to her dream but not quite. When she dreamed, they were holding hands and they were walking side by side, not her trailing behind. They opened the first door they came to and stood in shock. It was dark and dusty and full of boxes. Obviously it had not been opened in years. Moving down to the second door they discovered the same. In fact, further investigation proved that all of the bedrooms were in some state of disrepair. What the heck is this? Hasn't she ever cleaned? Hinata thought about trying to calm the boy down, but then realized that she didn't even know where to begin. Naruto looked over at the girl hovering in the doorway. He hadn't really thought much about it when Oba-chan had assigned her to the mission with him. In fact, he hadn't thought about her much period the whole time they'd know each other. But after their talk before the Chunin exam and the past week of training together every day, he was finding that she was kind of nice in a very quiet sort of way. He realized that not only did he like people like her, but he liked her herself. Nay, Hinata. She looked up from where she was twiddling her fingers in the doorway. He grinned at her, which made her heart stop. Wanna start moving stuff out? Hinata lifted the box off of the table and was nearly pushed over backwards by its weight. Naruto had to drop his own box to grab the other side of hers. They stood across from each other, hands just barely brushing as they held the edges of the box. Hinata's heart began to speed up. She blushed, pulled her hands back away from his and ducked her head. Gomen nasai. She whimpered out softly, her embarrassment easy to hear. Unfortunately, easy to hear did not mean that Naruto was able to hear it. Someone more sensitive would have smiled and helped her carry out the box. Naruto, however, didn't understand what Hinata was apologizing for and wasn't afraid to ask. What for? Hinata looked up at him with wide eyes. What was she apologizing for? For trying to pick up too heavy a box? For making him help her? For accidentally touching his hand? She really didn't know. Naruto, thankfully, didn't press the matter. Shoving into the weird things Hinata does category, he asked her took the box from her and carried it across the hall into the already packed room. Hinata scrambled to pick up the box he had dropped and put it away. Naruto dusted his hands off and looked at the room, now packed to the ceiling with boxes. Well, that was the last of it, he said. They had managed to clean out 2 rooms by stuffing 2 other rooms to the breaking point. They were empty, but still covered in dust and cobwebs. Ano, do you think we should clean them out before we get One-chan? Hinata asked. She said to know when we were finished emptying it out, and we're finished emptying it out. He was more than a little irritated by the woman. It had been a week and she had taught them nothing, just handed them the scroll, and told them to start teaching themselves. Some teacher she was. Naruto went and banged on Sora's door. Oh, we've finished clearing them out. Good, now you can clean them, Sora yelled from inside. When do we get to start training? Sora slid the door open. Right now, she said and started walking down the hall. Which 2 did you choose? Ano, these 2, Hinata said. Good choices. You'll have great views once the windows get cleaned off. Naruto glared at her. I thought that we were going to train. Sora rolled her eyes. Impatient aren't you? What's skill number 24? Nani? The scroll Naruto. What's skill number 24 on the scroll? Oh. He stuck his hand behind his head. I think it's in my pack. Sora rolled her eyes again. Baka, in the interest of time, I will tell you that the 24th skill is clean floor no jutsu. Nani? You're going to use jutsu to clean the floor? Better to use it to clean the floor than kill someone. There was deadly silence. Look, Naruto, I know you're frustrated. I know you want to train. But right now the only thing you know how to do is beat people up. You want to be Hokage? It's not about being the most powerful ninja in the village. It's about being the best. There's a difference between them. What's the difference? He yelled at her, but without his usual spirit. Sora smiled softly. Hopefully, by the time our 3 years are up, you'll have learned that. For now, she said, grabbing him in a headlock and rubbing his blonde hair, you just need to know that I'm doing these things for a reason and follow my directions. Hey, get off of me! Naruto wiggled and yelled. Releasing him with a giggle, Sora walked over to Hinata. Now, the key behind this technique is to create a flat plane of chakra between the dirt and the floor. The 2 seals are dragon and hair. After executing them, slide your chakra out underneath the dirt. Next, retract the chakra along with the dirt on top. Watch. Stepping out into the hallway, she made the seals, said the name, then lightly placed her hand down on the floor. The whole floor flashed purple for a second, then glowed spotless. At Sora's feet was a small pile of dirt. Well, that's the basics of it. It works on most flat surfaces, so you can do the walls and the windows as well. There is a more advanced version where you eliminate the dirt once you are done, but that's a little beyond your reach right now. Ano, wouldn't it be easier to just sweep the hallway? Not if you are using your chakra efficiently. Trust me, by the time you start trying to clean all of the floors in the house this size, it's well worth it. Hey, when was the last time you did that? Naruto asked from across the room. Sora glared at him, but decided not to start another fight. Do you have any questions? No reply. I'll be in the kitchen. Come get me if you need a hand. You'll probably want to hurry. It's almost 8 o'clock. If you wait much longer, you won't have anywhere to sleep. She left the room. A few seconds later they heard her steps going down the stairs. What kind of teacher is she anyway? Who tells ninjas to clean floors? Naruto yelled down the hall. Hinata just stood there. Had Naruto not been listening? Sora had told them why they were doing the exercise. It was a chakra manipulation skill. She looked at him, puzzled. Was he always this bad of a listener? She looked at the floor. She couldn't tell him that. He had always been an inspiration to her, loud and harsh, yes, but in an admirable way. It never occurred to her that she might ever find him lacking in some way. But he hadn't seemed to listen to a word Sora said. Quietly she sat down in the corner and started to work on the jutsu. She was used to making sharp punches with her chakra, not thin sheets. It was frustrating to try and maintain the smooth plane. Furthermore, it was hard to place the sheet just on top of the floor so that it grabbed all of the dirt up. She kept having some dust left of the floor. Across the room Naruto muttered to himself. This was so stupid. Jutsus for cleaning floors had to be the stupidest idea he had ever heard of. But he would show that woman. Ha! Mastering such an useless jutsu is a piece of cake for the future Hokage. But every single time the future Hokage tried, he just ended up with the floor scratched up and dirt being blown up in his face. Finally, Hinata decided that she needed help. She had been trying for hours to get it right, but she was still unable to get all the dirt up off of the floor. The rest of it seemed to be in place. She could hold the sheet of chakra flat and roll it up to bring the dirt back to her. But she always left dirt behind. One-chan had said that she would answer questions, right? Hinata got up from the floor and slipped past an oblivious Naruto. Walking quietly down the hall, she found the stairs went down. There was a light on in the kitchen and Hinata could hear someone singing. She quietly looked through the open door. Sora was cooking something and singing along with the sappy love song that was coming out of the small stereo on the counter. She was dancing along, exaggerating the movements as if she was making fun of the song more than anything else. Hinata smiled. Suddenly she seemed like a teenage girl. Hinata frowned. She wondered how old Sora was. Ano, One-chan. Hinata-chan, I am not turning around until you say it again without the ano. As she was still facing the stove she obviously meant it, but her tone held a joking quality that let Hinata know she was half teasing. Hinata smiled, her confidence boosted. One-chan. Sora turned around with a smile. Hi, Hinata-chan? I'm having trouble with the jutsu. I keep leaving dirt behind. Sora wiped her hands off on a dish rag. Let me see. She watched as Hinata tried to clean off a wide patch of the kitchen floor. The girl almost had it, but she wasn't using her chakra forcefully enough to get all of the ground and dirt up. That's impressive. You have really good control. Hinata blushed. The only thing is that you aren't using your chakra aggressively enough. She knocked her hand on the floor. How many coats of varnish do you think are on this floor? Hinata was very confused. I don't know. 7. I know because I put all of them on there. Now, how hard do you think that varnish is? Pretty hard? Hinata said hesitantly. Harder than ground in dirt? Suddenly Hinata realized where all of this was going. Hi, so you could use more chakra to pick up the dirt without worrying about wrecking the floor. Speaking of which, that's what Naruto is doing, right? Ano, it's a bit scraped. Sora rolled her eyes. Meaning he's probably gouged it all up. You go ahead and go upstairs and practice gradually increasing the amount of chakra. Also, try curling the sides of the sheet up just a little bit before you roll it back. The dust won't escape out of the sides then. Hinata smiled and nodded. Sora watched as the girl quietly walked out of the room. Considering how fast she was going through things, it would only be another hour or so before she completed the task. Sora heard loud angry curses coming from upstairs and sighed. Naruto, on the other hand, might take another day. She put the kettle on. It took Hinata another hour and a half to figure out how to clean the whole floor without leaving anything behind. She was oddly proud of the small clump of dust that was sitting at her feet. Naruto stared at her in shock. Then suddenly he was on his feet. Nay, you can do it, Hinata? Can you give me some hints? Hinata was awed. He would ask for her help. Even when he wouldn't ask Sora for help, he was actually asking her. Sure, Naruto-kun, she said, nervously tucking a strand of hair behind her ear and staring at the floor. Really? Let's go into the other room where the floor is still dirty. Once again grabbing her arm, he hauled her out into the hall. Suddenly he stopped short. Hinata peeked around his shoulder. Sitting on the floor in front of them were 2 piles of bed linens, they packs, and 2 covered trays of food. In between the trays there was a note, which Naruto grabbed to read. Kids, my guess is that when you get this, Hinata will have figured out the jutsu and cleaned out the first room. As it is no doubt very late, and we have had a rather long day. I suggest that both of you turn in. Towards that end, I have already cleaned the second room. Tomorrow you two can work on teaching Naruto using some of the other rooms upstairs. Good job. Sora. Naruto finished reading the note and handed it to Hinata. While she read it, he sat down on the floor and started looking through the food on the trays. Eh? No ramen? He yelled, disappointed. Grudgingly he began to eat the food on the trays. Hinata knelt down opposite him and started looking through her own tray. The food was fairly basic: miso, rice, a few dumplings and some chicken, but when Hinata took her first bite, it was surprisingly good. Nay, Hinata. She looked up from her food. How did you do the floor cleaning thing? Hinata blushed and looked back at her tray. Ano, Wani-chan helped me. Before I wasn't using enough chakra to get all of the dirt up. She paused, staring at the chopsticks in her hand. Maybe you are using too much chakra, since you are scraping the floor, she added hesitantly. Naruto seemed to consider this for a second before nodding firmly. You're probably right, he said as he went back to eating. Hinata looked at Naruto in astonishment. She couldn't believe what she had just done. Which room do you want, Hinata? Ano, I don't care. Naruto stood up and started carrying piles of futons and blankets into the 2 rooms. Here, why don't you take the one you cleaned? Hinata nodded and picked up her bag to take it into the room. Good night, Hinata, Naruto called out over his shoulder as he walked down the hall. Naruto-kun? His room was right next to hers, so why was he leaving? He turned and looked over his shoulder at her. Ano, where are you going? He grinned at her. I'm going to keep training. Hopefully I'll have it before you and Wani-chan wake up tomorrow. Oh. She was ready to drop and he was still able to train. She smiled at his determination. Good night, Naruto-kun. He waved at her and kept walking down the hall. She went inside the room and started laying out her futon. Looking over, she saw the scratched-up section of floor that Naruto had been working on. She smiled. Sora awoke in the middle of the night to a string of curses coming from the floor above her. Damn, the boy was loud. She rolled over and put her pillow over her head. It gradually started to penetrate through her head that he was still up and working on the jutsu. She lifted the pillow up enough to check the time. It was 2 a.m. Was Naruto that resolved to learn the jutsu? She had rarely come across someone that determined. She smiled and snuggled back down into the blankets. The next day Sora and Hinata would find Naruto curled up sleeping on an immaculately clean floor up on the 4th floor. Pleased with their progress, Sora had explained that the next thing they should learn was dishes no jutsu. Same idea, but more advanced as the dishes were more delicate and not quite flat. As usual, Naruto protested and Sora had knocked him over the head. Once they had gotten a hold of the dishes, Sora had moved them on using chakra to slice vegetables. Then to heat water for cooking. Then using chakra to dry their clothes. Naturally, Naruto struggled a bit with this one. He burned a dozen bed sheets before he figured it out, and so the days began to pass. They gradually started to check off more of the techniques on the scroll and life at the house fell into a rather predictable rhythm. It was driving Naruto crazy, but Hinata was enjoying it. Training was difficult, but so far she hadn't been asked to do anything that required fighting. She was gradually losing some of her nervousness around Naruto. She was beginning to hope that these days would never end. The men sat cloaked in darkness around a large circular table. None of them really trusted any of the others and they sipped their sake carefully, tasting for poison in every drop. Still they knew that they would be able to accomplish far more with the assistance of the others than they would be able to alone. Striking out on your own, even if you were willing to deal with the hassle of subordinates, was incredibly messy. Orochimaru had proved that. Finally, one of them spoke. They have moved the boy out of the village. Where? We are not sure. Approximately a month ago a woman entered Leaf Village and left a few hours later in the company of 2 genins, one of which was the boy. And the other? The heir to the Hyuga clan. What of the woman? No one seems to know anything about her. She obviously knows the Godame Hokage, but as to where she has taken them, no one in the village seems to know. Rumors say they left on a training mission for 3 years. 3 years. They would have the same age that you had when you left, Itachi. The man showed no reaction. Do we know the woman's name? Sora is the only name we have been able to come up with, but that could easily be a pseudonym. Sora? Questioned one of them suddenly. Yes. Do you know a Sora? Know of perhaps. Years ago in the West there were 2 women who were some of the most widely feared ninjas of the time. They were some of the most efficient killers anyone had ever seen. Mercenaries? He shook his head. Not quite. They had their own moral code which no one was able to really decipher. They certainly took jobs, but they were known to turn down many lucrative offers as well, and they were known to kill potential clients if they were offended by what they asked them to do. And one of them was named Sora. Yes, the younger of the 2, an incredible ninjutsu and taijutsu user. If it was not for their morals, I would have suggested them for recruitment. However, no one has heard a word about them in over 3 years. It is as if they disappeared off the face of the earth. How would the Leaf recruit such an ally? Could they have hired her to protect the boy? I'm not sure. My memories of them are old and faded. Perhaps she was hired. It does not matter. Any one of us should be able to overpower them. For now all we need to worry about is finding where she has hidden the boy. Agreed. Itachi, as the acquisition of the boy has become something of your project, why don't you spearhead this? The man's red stare cut across the table. Fine. Naruto was suddenly woken up, just like every single morning for the past 3 months, by music. Loud techno music with a strong, pulsing beat that shook the floor could be heard all over the place. He could also hear the lead singer blaring out lyrics about love and broken hearts, and, only slightly softer, he could hear Sora singing along. He rolled over to stare bleary-eyed at the clock. 6:30 am? He groaned and buried his face in the pillow. They had been up until 1 the night before, while he tried to get a hold of some stupid chakra weaving thing that was on the scroll. It was skill number 60, but they had only completed about 40. 3 months and he was only less than halfway done. He had thought that he would be finished by now, but the tasks had gotten surprisingly harder. The floor cleaning exercise was piece of cake compared to what she was having them do now. On top of that, she had hauled them into the library one day and informed them that they were to begin school studying again as well. Then she had started piling them up with books to read. Mainly they were history books. Lots and lots of history, with dates and people to remember. Every morning when they would come down for breakfast she would be there and would start quizzing them. Who was the third Kazekage? What was he known for? What was his strongest influence on the development of the hidden village of the sand? Why did he? And that was all of their training. No sparring. No drilling. No new battle techniques. Nothing but that stupid scroll. He was starting to hate Sora. She was just like most of the people back in Leaf. She didn't think he was worthy of training. He had tried to prove to her that he was strong enough to start training in the advanced stuff. He kept trying to challenge her to get her to see how strong he was. She wouldn't even respond to a challenge properly. For the first 3 weeks she had simply told him he was stuck with her, rolling her eyes and ignoring his antics. Then one day she had held up her hand in a strange sign. See this, Naruto? This is 1. She changed the sign. This is 2. She changed again. This is 3. She smirked. And this is what happens if you get to 3. Silence no jutsu. And all of a sudden Naruto couldn't talk. It was as if he had laryngitis and no matter how hard he tried he was unable to move his vocal cords. Hinata had stared in shock. That is a technique from west of the mountains. Mainly it is used to keep guards from raising the alarm during an invasion as it can be used from a great distance with a minimal amount of chakra. It also works for silencing brats. Naruto tried to decide which he hated more, the jutsu or the woman who performed it. He decided that what he really hated was that she wouldn't teach it to him. He sighed and rolled off the futon and onto the floor. He was at an impasse. She obviously wasn't training him enough, but at the same time he couldn't figure out how to get out of it. He was under orders, so he couldn't go back home. He challenged her yet again, and she shrugged it off. Suddenly, an idea came to him. If she wasn't going to train him, he would have to train himself. There had to be scrolls on how to do different techniques in that library, right? If he searched for them, he was sure to be able to find some that he could use, like when he had learned the Kage Bunshin. He grinned. What exactly did she have in that library? Sora was getting more than a little tired of waiting for them to come to breakfast. She briefly considered using chakra to dump water all over their beds, but that would only give Naruto something else to bug her about learning. She sighed and looked out the kitchen window. She was started to see Hinata in the courtyard. She was crouched low, practicing punching and barely moving across the slate floor of the courtyard. Sora had never seen her practice fighting before. She paused and frowned as she watched Hinata move. Turning the burners on the stove off, she headed outside. Hinata closed her eyes and concentrated. Memories of training sessions with her father started to come back to her. You thought of yourself as an unstoppable force. There was no stronger clan than the Hyuga. Their bloodline was the most powerful and no one could stand before it. They could force everyone to their knees. She imagined the targets, where she could hit her opponents in order to stop chakra flow. She had been told that she didn't need to worry about precision at the beginning. The important thing was that she built up her power. She had never gotten to the point where she was allowed to concentrate on precision. Her power had simply never been great enough. Still, she kept trying, hoping for the day when she would be good enough. Opening her eyes again, she stepped back and resumed her stance. I am strong and you will not move me. Breathing in, she started to run through a series of punches designed to work their way along all of an opponent's chakra holes. Even in her mind's eye, she missed half of them. She sighed and began to start over again. What was that? Hinata stopped at the voice and looked over to see Sora sitting on the stairs, mug of tea in hand. There was a clear note of sarcasm in her voice. Hinata looked at her feet ashamed. Of course Oni-chan would be able to tell how horrible she was. Was that the great Juken style that the Hyuga clan invented in order to utilize their bloodline? Hinata felt like crying, but she was determined not to. She knew her execution was an insult to the form, but she hated when it was pointed out. Suddenly she realized that Sora was standing in front of her, bending down so that their heads were even. Let me guess. I am an unmovable mountain. None are stronger than me and all who challenge shall be vanquished. Sora's voice was deep and mocking, obviously parodying some old martial arts master. Hinata stared at Sora, who rolled her eyes. Sorry, Hinata-chan, don't take this as an insult, but you don't exactly seem like the unmovable mountain type. When Hinata just continued to stare, Sora sighed. Look, I'm not saying it's a bad form. It probably works very well for a lot of people in your family, but it doesn't fit your body type and it doesn't fit your personality. Hinata was amazed. Sora thought that the form was the problem, that it was what was defective, and not her. This was awful, she had to set her right. No, it's me. I can't do the form right. I'm just not talented enough. Really? You can't learn the form because you're not talented enough? Hinata nodded, looking back down at her feet. Bullshit. Hinata looked up shocked. What? It is bullshit. Do you think I'm blind? I know how good you are. I've seen how hard you work at the jutsus, and how well you are able to master them. Maybe you were able to convince yourself that you don't have enough talent to master the form, but you are not going to be able to convince me. Hinata stared. Never before had she received such a loud vote of confidence. Naruto had cheered her on at the Chunin exam, but all he had told her was for her to do her best. Never before had anyone told her that they thought she was actually talented. She felt like crying, but she realized that Sora was talking again. Now I don't know whatever special Hyuga form that is that you're using, so I can't help teach you that. However, I generally use Shina to be, which works well for people who are fast and lightweight. I could teach you that. Hinata couldn't believe it. Thoughts were running through her head at 100 miles per hour. She actually wanted to teach her a whole new style, one the Hyuga clan didn't use. She couldn't remember an heir ever doing anything other than the traditional style. Of course it's not easy. It's all about movement and flexibility. There's a lot more acrobatics in it than most other forms. Mostly it's done in the West, so no one out here will have seen it, which is an advantage. For generations the Hyuga clan had been learning this form. It was specially designed to work well with their bloodline. You had to get in close to use it, which made it dangerous and difficult to master, but once mastered it was almost unstoppable. It would take a little bit of effort to figure out how to incorporate the use of your bloodline in, but I'm sure we could do it. What do you say? But I'm a Hyuga, Hinata managed to stutter out. God damn it. This was why she hated clans, bloodlines and things associated with villages in general. Here was a girl who probably didn't even want to be a ninja, who would probably be better off being something like a doctor or a teacher. But because of a cruel trick of birth, she had to be heir to a backwards clan that was so set in its ways that it wouldn't even consider that maybe not everything worked for everyone. Yes. But you're a Hyuga for whom tradition doesn't work. Sometimes things have to change, but no one has ever. Are you going to have children? Hopefully. Then are you going to give your children the exact same type of childhood you had just because it's Hyuga tradition? Hinata thought about the seal on her cousin's forehead. About sleeping alone in her big room, curled up into a small ball. About lectures on family responsibilities and expectations and her inability to measure up. About the endless days of drilling when most girls her age were out making friends. About living her life isolated, away from the village, in the ghost-filled halls of the Hyuga house. She gently shook her head. No. Sora sighed and looked at the ground. You and I are strangely similar. I was raised into a destiny I didn't want to fulfill. We were probably brought up in very similar ways. I decided to bust out. I can't say I suggest doing the same things I did, but I think a little radical thinking on your part would be good. Hinata looked at her puzzled. What do you mean you don't recommend the way you did it? Sora shook her head. That is for me only. She flashed a grin. One more question. Hi, is that haircut a Hyuga tradition? Hinata blushed and shook her head. Sora gave an exaggerated sigh in mock relief. Hallelujah. He had been relieved when there was no one in the kitchen. Scrunching his nose up at the eggs and potatoes Sora had left in the skillet, he rummaged through the cabinets for some ramen. Putting the kettle on, he glanced out the window to see Sora talking to Hinata. Whatever they were talking about, it looked serious. Good, it looked like they would be busy for a while. He stuffed the ramen into his mouth and bolted up to the third floor. Naruto was rather proud of himself for thinking of the whole library thing. The place was huge. Apparently Nanisher had been of the opinion that a library was a key part of her new ninja community, and had amassed an enormous collection of books. It filled a large wide room with tall shelves pushed closely together. There was bound to be something in here he could use. Reading the tags posted on the end of each shelf, Naruto was able to find a section entitled Ninjutsu Practicum. He had no idea what practicum meant, but he was defiantly interested in ninjutsu, and it wasn't history. He started scanning through the titles. The theory and execution of summoning spells. 100 basic water jutsus. Zen and the art of kunai maintenance. The complete guide to fire jutsus. Basic through advanced techniques. Aha! Now they're talking. Naruto grabbed the book and moved over to a table. Opening it up he flipped directly to the back where the advanced techniques were. He frowned in disappointment when there were only 5 techniques listed, but her immediately brightened when he started reading the descriptions. Fire Cliffs no Jutsu. This technique produces a thin wall of fire up to 50 feet high. For all but those closely associated with fire, this wall is impossible to pass once executed. It is used to divide up army and erect defenses around buildings. Significant historical uses include, blah blah blah. Naruto stopped reading and started scanning down past the boring part, including the warning statement. He looked at the list of hand seals. Damn, there were a lot of them. Sighing, he started running through them. Ox, dragon, ram, hare, ram again, horse. A hand came down and slammed the book shut. What the hell do you think you're doing? A voice screamed. Naruto slowly looked up to see a Sora with eyes on fire with anger. Oh shit. Busted. Once Sora had convinced Hinata to start training taijutsu, she had gone to get Naruto. The boy needed to learn some of it too anyway, although she certainly wasn't going to teach him the whole form. It was a woman's form after all, but they could start out working on some of the basic exercises together. She had been impressed when she found the boy in the library. Maybe he was finally starting to take the academic stuff seriously. It would indicate reaching a level of maturity in which he understood that he wouldn't be able to be Hokage without knowing their things. However, her heart had stopped when she saw what he was reading. No one but her or Yasu and her husband had been living here for the last 14 years, and before that it had only been Nanisher, or the occasional guest. So it never occurred to her to take out any of the more dangerous books from the shelves. She had simply never expected anyone to start looking through them to find the most dangerous jutsus possible. She couldn't believe what he was going. How could any be so stupid as to try a technique like this unsupervised and without learning the lower ones? In a library no less. The worst part was the terror which had sliced through her to the core the moment that she saw what he was reading. Naruto had more than enough chakra to perform this technique, but not enough control. If she hadn't come at just the right time, she waited for Naruto's reply, glaring at him down in his chair. She was so stupid, not teaching him anything and then getting mad at him when he went off and taught himself things. He was a shinobi after all, and a shinobi was measured by his skill in battle. He wasn't getting any better here while she made him read history and wash dishes. Well, you weren't teaching me anything, he grumbled. What the hell did he think she had been doing in the past 3 months? Not teaching you anything? Apparently I haven't been if you were so stupid as to try this. He jumped up on his chair so that their heights were approximately the same. I'm not stupid, really? Read the warning, Naruto. She opened the book again, and jammed her finger into the page. It says right here, this is a dangerous, highly advanced fire technique. No one inexperienced with mid and upper level fire techniques should attempt this jutsu. This should only be attempted under suitable supervision, as improper execution of this technique will possibly result in highly volatile and uncontrollable fires, and she would have been able to do virtually nothing to stop them. They would have killed him almost instantly and ripped through the rest of the house. She might have been able to save Hinata and herself, but that wasn't a guarantee. He would have been. She slammed her hand on the page again. Would you like to tell me what your plan was if the fire got out of control? Why the hell wouldn't she acknowledge that he was strong? And why wouldn't she let him get stronger? Didn't she understand that he had to? There was a whole village he'd get to acknowledge him and few people he had to protect. I wasn't planning on doing it in here. I was just learning it so I could learn something because you aren't teaching me anything. He started to throw a punch at her, but she caught his wrist in her hand. She lost it. The combination of terror and anger had overwhelmed her, and all she could think of was pounding into the kid's brain just how stupid he was. You want to fight me? She asked, grabbing the back of his collar with her free hand and starting to drag him out of the room. You have been pushing all my buttons since the moment we stepped out of that goddamn village of yours. You seem to think that you are some sort of genius, and at this point I am too pissed off at you to worry about your goddamn confidence. She slammed open the front door and started moving down the stairs, dragging Naruto behind her as he kicked and screamed. Hinata looked up in surprise from where she was practicing the chakra weaving. Sora pulled Naruto out into the middle of the courtyard, then pushed him away, letting him land on the ground. You think that I'm such a horrible teacher? You want to fight me and prove that you can kick my ass? She screamed at him. Fine then. Let's see what you've got. Naruto scrambled up from the ground, fists clenched at his sides. God damn it! He yelled before crossing his fingers. He would show her. Kagebushin no jutsu, he screamed at the top of his lungs. Instantly the entire courtyard was filled with shadow clones. Glancing around, Sora assessed the situation. There were probably a little over 100 of them. He wasn't operating with Kibi power yet. She smiled as they all drew kunai and charged blindly at her with a scream. She had discovered that he had never really put much effort into his formal training, relying on sharp wits, power and determination to get him through. Unfortunately for him, she had all three of those, plus years of formal training and battle experience. Bending her knees, she jumped into the air, letting a dozen clones slam into each other underneath her. She twisted her body in the air in a graceful spiral before landing in the middle of another group. She immediately began to destroy everyone that came into her range. Hinata half hid herself behind a column as she watched. She had never seen anyone summon so many clones at once. However, even more incredible was the way that Sora was moving. Dear God, was that the Shina-to-be form she was supposed to learn? It was as if the laws of physics no longer applied to her. Sora flipped onto her hands, then swept her feet around, taking out 3 more clones. Landing on her feet, she jumped again, twisting high in the air. She released a shower of kunai that killed a dozen more. Landing again, she began a series of flips, punches and kicks, twisting and turning, moving down close to the ground 1 minute and gliding through air next. But always moving. It was the most beautiful form Hinata had ever seen, almost dance-like in its execution. She would have sworn that Sora was floating, not even really touching the ground. Half the time Hinata wasn't even sure what it was that Sora had done to destroy the clone. She would get near it, and suddenly it would vanish in a puff of smoke. Surely Sora didn't expect her to master that? As the last of the clones charged her, Sora simply parried with her left hand, then wrapped her hand around his wrist, and pulled down and out, sending him somersaulting into the floor. Turning back to him, she smiled. Ready to give up? Naruto scowled and began to start the Rasengan. He was not going to lose to her. He wasn't stupid. He knew that she had a lot she could teach him. He still had to get her to teach him the chakra bind. If she needed proof that he was worth training, he would give it to her. He would make her acknowledge that he was able to learn the advanced stuff. He jammed all the power he could into the ball of chakra and ran towards her. Sora simply dodged. She was impressed that he was able to do the third stage Rasengan that well, although he was using 2 hands instead of 1. The fourth had always done it with 1. Plus he didn't know what situations he should use it under. He seemed to know no basic strategies. The boy had raw power and a few impressive techniques. She darted quickly to the side as he yelled and tried to tag her once again. He shot past her and crashed into on the columns. Watch where you're throwing those things or you're going to hit Hinata. Sora stood back and watched him. He was definitely trying to come up the plan. Maybe he wasn't quite as much the idiot as she had originally thought. Damn it! Unless he was able to figure out a way to trick her into staying in one place, he wasn't going to be able to hit her. Plus she was just standing there calmly watching him while he was giving her everything he had. He summoned more clones, then quickly dropped to the ground and transformed into a stone. He crawled towards her as she quickly destroyed the clones. But he kept one hanging back so that she would think it was him. As long as he was able to get one of her legs, she should slow down enough to be caught. Crouching a few feet away from her, he began to form the Regensen. Sora stared at the clones standing a few dozen yards away. There should have been one more. He had summoned 24, but she had only destroyed 23. That meant that there was one more plus the actual Naruto. The question was, which of them was standing in front of her? Suddenly, he began to charge and she shifted into a better fighting stance. Then, out of the corner of her eye she saw another Naruto coming towards her low to the ground, Regensen spinning in his hands. She only had an instant to figure out what was going on. She launched herself into a backflip, kicking the clone as she went over and narrowly dodging the real Naruto's hand as she grasped the back of his jacket. Continuing the motion over, she landed on her feet and threw Naruto over her head towards the far end of the courtyard. She refused to let herself give in to the desire to rest her hand against her knees and pant. Damn it, he shouldn't have come that close to getting her. Hinata's eyes were wide with fear. She didn't know what to do. How could she get them to stop this? On the other side of the courtyard Naruto stood up and glared at his opponent. He had no choice. Kuchios no jutsu. Summoning Gamma the boss should do the trick. He would squash her flat. Then they would see who she thought was worthy of learning the advanced techniques. Growling, he brought his hand up to his mouth and bit his thumb. Sora realized instantly what he was going to do. Shit, she couldn't let him summon anything here. Who knows what he could summon? Anything large would destroy the courtyard, or worse, and it was already going to take a lot out of her to repair the damage done by the Rasengan. And with his chakra stores plus those he could possibly get from the Cubish had no choice but to stop him. Her eyes darkened from light blue-violet to a deep, vibrant purple. She watched Naruto paint a stripe of blood across her palm. He moved his hands into the first seal. Instantly she was across the floor, slamming her palm into the center of his chest. He choked and sputtered as she quickly bound all of his chakra. Catching him behind the neck, she laid him down on the ground. She leaned over him, but didn't look at him. When she spoke her voice was so quiet that Naruto could barely hear her. If you summoned the Kyuubi's chakra now you could probably overwhelm the bind. However, the fact of the matter is that you're 10 years younger than I am with far less training. Other than trying to overwhelm me with power or trick me, there isn't much that you can do to attack me. That might work, but I don't think either of us wants to find out. She stood up and walked away up into the house. Naruto squeezed his eyes shut. Damn it, damn it, damn it! Who the hell had told her? What gave her the right to know about that? He felt ashamed and humiliated. The whole fight had lasted less than 10 minutes. He had failed. She hadn't acknowledged him. He looked over and spotted Hinata. She was still standing behind the column staring at him. He couldn't read the expression in her eyes. She swallowed and started to walk over to him. She knelt down next to him. Can you move at all? She asked. Me? I'm fine, just taking a little rest. Hinata smiled. Leaning over she picked up his head and slid her arm underneath his shoulders. She swung his arm around her neck and slowly stood up. Let's get you up to your room. God damn it! Sora swung her fist into the wall, leaving a large splintered hole. That wasn't the way she should have handled that. The boy had caught her off guard and sparked her temper. She hadn't meant to go after him quite that badly, to cut him down so thoroughly, but how could he have been so stupid? She sighed and sat down at her desk. She rested her temples on her hands and closed her eyes. Dear God, what had made her think that she would be able to handle this? She had jumped into it too quickly. The moment she had realized who he was she hadn't been able to say no. But at the same time, she wasn't ready to teach anyone. Sure, she knew the material, but she didn't have the patience or ability to teach. She looked through her fingers to the picture of Nanashi-sensei on her desk. The woman was remarkably beautiful with dark rich hair and skin combined with wide startlingly blue eyes. They seemed to spark with an inner fire, like kindling that was always just on the verge of starting the blaze. There was so much determination and so much kindness in those eyes. If it had been her instead of Sora who had found Naruto in the library, she would have known exactly what to do. She wouldn't have lost her head and started screaming at him. She would have remained calm and stopped him from doing anything and then carefully explained to him why he couldn't go off and learn dangerous jutsu unsupervised. She wouldn't have lost her temper, hauled Naruto outside and pounded him into the ground. Memories of her father echoed back to her, the condescending voice ringing in her ears. I suppose it would be too much to ask for you to be number one among your peers despite your blood. You are quickly proving yourself to be useless. He had left her panting on the floor, frantically trying to draw breath into her lungs. She was no better than he had been. True, her actions had been done out of fear and anger rather than cool calculation, but the results were the same. Here she was, mimicking the actions of the one man she truly hated. Tears started forming in the corners of her eyes. She had never felt so guilty in her life. Piled on her desk were 5 letters from Tsunade, all asking where the hell her reports were. She had sent the first one off, but had missed the last 2. She just couldn't figure out what to say. That she sucked as a teacher? That her and Naruto were at each other's throats. She wanted to do right by the boy. After the life he had led, he deserved that. Still, she didn't understand him. Why did he always have to make everything a battle? How could she train a boy who questioned everything she said? She couldn't help but think that it was something that Naruto would have grasped easily. When she had picked her up and taken Sora with her on her wanderings, she had known exactly what to do. She was warm and caring, encouraging her to come out of the shell she had locked herself into tightly. She was the perfect teacher and surrogate mother. Sora couldn't be any of those things. She wasn't a teacher, she was a warrior. She had no experience with children except changing Mickey's diapers. Not exactly good experience to use in teaching a 13-year-old kid. She had always assumed that she would never have to really deal with children. Hell, she had worked hard to never make any commitment of the type that would lead her to having to deal with them. For all that she admired and wanted to be like Naruto, she would never share her teacher's passion for children. Any life that might have led Sora to marriage, children, or even just a community had died along with Naruto. Sora looked back at the picture. The two of them were sitting on a bench in a garden in the spring. Nanashi's eyes sparkled with warmth and humor, and a slight bit of the trickster, as she smiled into the camera. A kimono-clad Sora sat next to her, smiling slightly, but with haunted eyes. It had been taken just after Naruto had taken her on as a student. I'm sorry, Nanashi-sensei. I'm not you. I don't know if I can do this. Hinata paused outside of Naruto's door with a lunch tray. She knew she should just knock and go in, but something was forcing her to hesitate. They had just managed to get him back into his room and onto his futon. Standing next to him, watching him struggle to breath in and out, she hadn't known what to do. He seemed so little like his usual self. The spark had gone out of his eyes, and he had been silent during the entire struggle to get him up the stairs. Normally, the thrill of being that close to him, with his arm over her shoulder and his side pressed against her, would have overwhelmed her. But all she could feel was worry, so she had done what she always did and retreated. She had hated herself for doing it. It seemed like there should be something she should say, something she should do for him. But she hadn't been able to think of anything. No matter how many times she had been in that same position, she still had no idea what to say. But if there was one thing that she had learned from Naruto, it was to keep on fighting. No matter what happened, he had never given up and never really let her give up either. Memories of him from their school days, the Chunin exam and the past few months training together were burned into her memory, ready to surface whenever she was facing her worst doubts. So she had come back. Even though she still had absolutely no idea what to say to him, she was standing outside his door trying to get herself to knock. So, very softly she knocked. Naruto-kun? She called out. No answer. She tried again, slightly louder. Still no reply. So, very quietly, she slid the door open. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the window. It was a warm yellow light, but the room was so still that nothing could warm the room. The air wasn't moving, causing even the dust that was reflecting the light to appear frozen. Naruto-kun? She asked again, a little louder. He was lying in exactly the same position he had been when she left, spread out on his back, unseeing eyes staring up at the ceiling. Naruto's mind had gone numb. He was used to life knocking him down. He was used to picking himself back up. That had always been his method of operation. But now, he was suddenly wondering what he should do. He hadn't been strong enough. The fight had been a joke, even he could tell that. She wasn't going to train him. She was going to just keep on giving him stupid things to learn, because she knew. She knew about the demon inside of him, and because of that she looked down on him, just like everyone else. It was certainly nothing new. It had been happening his whole life. But it always hurt. And for some reason, this time it hurt more than usual. Hinata moved into the room and set the lunch tray down on the floor, kneeling beside the bed. Naruto-kun, I brought you some lunch. Hopefully some of the chakra bind has worn off now, so you should be able to eat. No reply. I made you some ramen, not the instant kind, but my own. He didn't move a muscle. She couldn't give up. She just had to keep talking. No matter how hard it was to push the words past her lips, she had to keep talking. I learned how to make it a few years ago. Father doesn't like for me to cook because it's beneath a lady of my status. Plus, I always make a mess. I try to be neat but something always seems to startle me and I spill something. When I tried ramen, Hanabi startled me and I dropped the bowl on her head. Father was furious. Still no response. Hinata bit her lower lip to hold back her tears. This wasn't Naruto. The Naruto that she knew never would just lay here like this. The Naruto she knew would be up and yelling at Sora, struggling to negate the effects of the jutsu. Was he this upset over Sora beating him? But he had always picked himself up before. Ano Naruto-kun? Are you okay? He just continued to stare at the ceiling. Naruto-kun, I know this morning was rough, but please. She bit back a shocked sob. She couldn't stand to see him like this. She wasn't very nice, but I don't think she meant it to turn out that way. She's been so nice to me. She's been training you. The sudden sound of his voice startled Hinata so much that she actually jumped. It took a minute for his words to sink in. Naruto-kun, she won't acknowledge me. Most people won't. I don't know why it hurts so bad this time. He squeezed his eyes shut in pain. Very gently, she laid her hand on top of his. I acknowledge you. I don't care whether you can beat her or not. To me, you'll always be the one who does what I can't. You'll always be the one who never gives up. There was a pause. Then Hinata felt him turn his hand under hers so that they were palm to palm. She blushed as he gently squeezed her hand. Why won't she? He asked. Hinata shook her head. I'm sorry, Naruto-kun. I just don't know. But she paused for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was even quieter than normal. I like her. She's hard-headed and kind of rude, but I can't help but feel that, in the end, she has our best interest at heart. He snorted and put his hands underneath his head, taking his head out of hers. What makes you think that? She just seems like a cranky, rude woman to me, Naruto grumbled. Hinata blushed. I am the heir to the Hume. Everyone looks at me like I'm a failure when I can't do something. She doesn't. She looked at his face and waited for his reply, but it didn't seem like it was coming. With a small sigh, she moved the lunch tray closer to the bed. I'll just leave this here in case you want any. He closed his eyes again. Arigato. She looked down at him and resisted the urge to sweep the bangs away from his forehead. I don't think that it's that she won't acknowledge you as much as she was angry. When Sora went to get you from the library, she was going to start teaching us a new taijutsu form. Maybe if you ask her, she'll still teach it to you. Naruto just turned his head away, his mood suddenly dark again. He didn't want to have anything to do with that woman. Hinata bit her lip. Please, Naruto-kun. I don't think that I can learn it by myself. Who would I practice with? Who would help me out? I don't know what I will do if you don't learn it too. She stood up and crossed to the door. Sliding the door open, she stood framed in the doorway with her head bowed. Please, just think about it. Hours after the sun had set, Naruto still couldn't sleep. Echoes of his conversation with Hinata ran through his head. Too much of what she had said rung true. She's hard-headed and kind of rude, but I can't help but feel that, in the end, she has our best interest at heart. I am the heir to the Hume. Everyone looks at me like I'm a failure when I can't do something. She doesn't. She looked at Hinata differently than those who saw her as just the Hume heir, and while he didn't like the eyes that Sora looked at him with, but they weren't the same eyes as the villagers back home. Suddenly one other thing she had said popped into his thought. To me, you'll always be the one who does what I can't. You'll always be the one who never gives up. And yet that was what he had been about to do, right when he was about to finally get what he wanted. She had been going up to get him to start taijutsu training. She had intended to start training him to really fight. He was going to be Hokage. Convincing her to still teach him the taijutsu stuff would be easy. He sat up in bed. He couldn't sleep with all of this going through his head, and now that the chakra bind had worn off, he was going to get some more ramen. Pushing his feet into a pair of slippers, he shuffled his way down the dark hallway. At the top of the stairs he saw that the light was on in the kitchen. It was almost 2 a.m, so who the hell could be up? He quietly walked over and peeped in. There was Sora sitting on the counter staring out the window. In her mouth was a spoon and in her hand was a large carton of triple chocolate fudge ice cream. She was wearing drawstring pants, a tank top and an enormous fuzzy pink robe with flowers all over it. She paused mid-bite to look over at Naruto standing in the doorway. He was dressed for bed in shorts and a t-shirt, but his clear eyes indicated that he probably hadn't gone to sleep yet. She smiled. Couldn't sleep? He nodded. Here for some ice cream? She offered him her spoon. No, I wanted ramen. He put the kettle on the stove and turned on the heat. He turned to the cabinets and opened to find a few more cups left. Is this all the ramen left? Hi. You might want to start rationing it. Rationing it? It's going to be a couple of months before we head down the mountain. Nanny! A few months? That's why I said you should ration it. The two of them sat in stone silence for a few minutes. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Why can't we go down and get more? She laughed softly. Not for that. I'm sorry about this morning. The kettle began to whistle. Naruto turned the stove off and stared at it. There were a few more minutes of silence. Why did you do it? He muttered. She shrugged and took another bite of ice cream. You scared me. All I could think of was you burning yourself to a crisp. I lost my temper. I could have controlled it. He pouted, pouring the hot water into the cup. Naruto, the last time I saw that technique performed it was by a jounin from the east. He had more than enough chakra to summon it, but not enough control. He burnt 4 acres of forest and killed 3 people. Nanny! But, more powerful techniques often require more control. You've gained a lot through working through the scroll, but not enough. Had you started that jutsu, I don't know if I could have gotten Hinata and myself off the mountain in time. You certainly would be dead. Oh. He was taken back by this. He could have killed Hinata. Sora shook her head. Naruto, why do you want to become strong so badly? So I can become Hokage. And why on earth would you want that? She sounded like Tsunade. Naruto opened his mouth to give his normal reply about acknowledgement, and stopped. Suddenly, it didn't seem like it was quite the truth, so, for the first time in his life, he said something slightly different. So that I can make sure that nothing happens to those precious to me, so that I'm not on the outside of the village anymore. Sora sighed. It was hard to argue with reasons like that. Are you sure? I've lived on the outside my whole life. It's not that bad. Heh. I've lived on the outside my entire life and I'm not going back. You sure you want to be Hokage? You can still have a lot of that just being a shinobi. I'm going to be the best and I don't go back on my word. Naruto grinned. That's my Nindo. Sora grinned. And that is one thing I agree with completely. They sat there looking at each other across the aisle. For the first time in weeks they thought this might actually work out. Then Sora's smile dropped. Of course, if you keep doing stupid things like you pulled this morning you are never going to make it to Hokage. Naruto's anger was back in an instant. Well, I wouldn't have done it if you had been teaching me anything. I have been teaching you things. What do you think the scroll is? That's not teaching me anything. Who the hell uses jutsu to do the dishes? I use jutsu to do the dishes. Just because it's not used in combat doesn't mean that it's useless. It's useless in terms of getting stronger. It's useless in terms of protecting people. It's useless in terms of becoming Hokage. Sora rolled her eyes and shook her spoon at him. It is not useless to becoming Hokage. These are things necessary to becoming a good shinobi. I've spent a lot of time outside the world of the hidden villages. Trust me, there are a lot of strong people out there, but not a lot of them are good ninjas, she growled in frustration. God damn it, do you even listen to what I say? Do you understand what I mean when I say a good ninja versus a strong ninja? There is no difference. Yes, there is. What does it mean to be Hokage? It means that you're the strongest in the village. And it means that you protect the village. And what? And you guide the village. You determine what path it is going to take in the future. You negotiate treaties, settle disputes between clans, and decide what missions to accept. You have to know if all of your shinobi are operating at top form and how to keep it that way. You have to make sure that there are children in the village to carry on your work. Keeping alive the light of a village means more than just going into battle for it. It means making sure that the village will stand even if you fall. Naruto stopped and thought about it. That was what the third had done, he realized. He had kept the village strong so that, even when he fell, they had been able to live without a Hokage for the few weeks that they were looking for Tsunade. Sora continued. Tsunade, Jiraiya and from I can tell, Kakashi, they are all good ninjas. In fact, all of the Hokages have been good ninjas, which is probably the only reason why I can stand the place at all. I have the feeling that you want to be a good ninja as well. Now I could go through and pull out all of the most dangerous techniques I knew and teach them to you. Maybe if I was prepping you for an exam that's what I'd do. But using the scroll and building up your skills gradually is the way that I know how to turn you into a good ninja. Your way stinks. I know. It's frustrating as hell. Quite frankly, I wasn't a big fan of it either when I had to do it. Then why the hell are we doing it? Because it's how I was trained and I know it works. I had to learn the entire scroll myself when I was a kid. She sighed. Still I suppose that it was for different reasons than you. Huh, when Nanisher gave me the scroll it was a way to give me something that wasn't deadly. It was to prep me for higher techniques as well. But mainly I think she did it because she wanted me to do something other than fight. I was raised to be a fighter and all I had been taught was how to kill. She scrunched up her nose. That and a lot of boring traditional things like serving tea and fan dancing. Really? You were good. Sort of. When I started traveling with Nanashi-sensei I was probably close to a Chunin level. How old were you? 7. Nanny? Well, it was all I had ever learned, even if I wasn't terribly good at it. At least not compared to the others I was training with. I was, as they loved to tell me, dead last. Naruto looked at her in amazement. She had been dead last like him? She grinned at her. You weren't very good? She glared at him before shrugging and taking another bite of ice cream. I didn't really have the personality for it. I didn't become good until much later on, even with an advanced bloodline. He gaped at her. You have an advanced bloodline? She shot him an incredulous look. You didn't notice? I had to use it today in my fight against you, otherwise I would have never stopped you in time. You have good potential. The things that are holding you back are experience and training, certainly not a lack of ability. Plus you have the personality of a fighter, something I lacked when I started training. What do you mean? Sora shrugged. Up until I was 13 I was more like Hinata than anyone else. Speaking of which, she looked over in the direction of the door. Are you going to hover there all night or come in to join us? Naruto looked half behind him to see Hinata standing there in a long kimono-style robe. Ano, she said. Come in, join us. Ice cream? Or do you want ramen? Or maybe something else? She smiled shyly before using the leftover hot water from Naruto's ramen to make herself some tea. How much did you hear? Sora asked, although she didn't seem upset about her eavesdropping. Ano, since you were talking about being Hokage, woke you up with the yelling, huh? Hinata shook her head. I wasn't sleeping. She sat next to Naruto on the kitchen island. Seems like none of us were. At least we can start getting these things sorted out now. Can you two listen for 5 minutes? They nodded. Okay, look. Sora started. Let me start by saying I am not a teacher. I have never taught anyone. Furthermore, the more I get into this whole teaching thing, the more I feel like a righteous bitch. As I like choosing when I am going to be bitchy, I will make the two of you a deal. You have to finish the scroll. The reason is it is a stepping stone towards a whole lot of other things that I could teach you. You also have to keep learning the history. However, I will also start teaching you taijutsu, tactics and combat ninjutsu. In return, I would like for you to follow my training methods. They may not be what you like, but I know they work. I don't like having you two think of me as some bitchy teacher. It makes me feel old and cranky. Then what should we think of you as? I don't know. You call me Wani-chan, just sort of think of me as an older sibling who knows more than you do. Naruto smirked. If we do that you won't be a bitch. Considering how much our personalities clash, probably not. Just not so much of one. So, do we have a deal? She held her hand out at them. Naruto grinned. I'll end up strong? I promise you to do everything I can to make you the strongest, best Hokage ever. He grabbed her hand in his. Deal. He turned to look at the girl next to him. Hinata? She smiled softly and nodded her head. Deal, she said softly, placing her hand on top of theirs. Sora smiled. You know I can't believe that you two don't want ice cream. Ha, like anyone would take ice cream over ramen. Who wouldn't take ice cream over ramen? What are you talking about? Hinata, you would take ramen over ice cream, right? Ano, come on, it's ramen. Hey you two. They turned to look at Sora. Flash. Sora grinned at them over the camera. That's going to be cute. Okay, now let me just set the timer here. She started fiddling around with buttons on the back. Ano, Wani-chan, I'm in my robe. Hinata protested. So am I. Come on, I don't have any pictures of the three of us yet. She placed the camera on top of a jar on the windowsill and then ran over to hop up onto the counter next to Hinata. All right, everyone. Smile. No. First ox, then ram and then dragon. Sora yelled. You said hare last time. Naruto yelled. Did not. Did too. Look, you little brat. I know what I am talking about as opposed to you, so. Ha! I know enough to know when you say one thing and then change it. Hinata sighed and took another sip of her tea. Over the past few weeks, one of the things she had learned was to stay out of Sora and Naruto's arguments. After the episode with Naruto and the Firewall no Jutsu, she had started to try and defuse the arguments between them. Gradually, however, she had come to realize that they rather enjoyed yelling at each other. One of them would pick a fight, they would call each other names for a few minutes, and then they would move on. As long as it wasn't too serious, she had learned not to get involved. In fact, they hadn't had a really serious fight for a few weeks now. There had been the one about how Sora was not going to go down the mountain just to get Naruto more ramen, resulting in a lecture on preservatives and sodium content from Sora. Then there had been one about Sora's early morning serenades along to the stereo, which had resulted in Naruto hiding her CDs, which, in turn, made Sora put the silence no jutsu on him for a week. And of course, the worst one when Sora explained that she couldn't teach Naruto Shina-to-be. It wouldn't work for you. Yes it would. No it wouldn't. Shina-to-be is based on a lot of aerial work and tight movements. While it may work for you, know that you're small. As soon as you grow up you're going to be too large. You're better off going with an iron fist, hit 'em hard form. So then are you going to teach me one of those? Sora shook her head. I don't really know any well enough to teach it. Then who the hell is going to teach me? Geez, calm down. You really need to get yourself under control. Under control? Why, you little, don't even think about it. At which point, Hinata had to step in and, tugging on their sleeves, try to get them to sit at opposite ends of the kitchen table long enough to calm down. There had been a great deal of muttering, name-calling and a couple of milder jutsus thrown at each other before they were once again able to talk to each other rationally. Hinata sighed. Wasn't Wani-chan supposed to be the adult? Look, there are two different styles of the main Shina form, Shina-to-be and Shina-tsuhiko. The one I am going to teach Hinata is a soft style. The one that you should learn is Shina-tsuhiko. It's a hard, more forceful style. The basics exercises are the same, so I can start teaching you now. Then who's going to teach me the more advanced stuff? Nori. Huh, Nori Yasu's husband. He's one of the best Suhiko fighters I've ever seen and a much better teacher than me. Once you're ready to move on to the style-specific stuff, I'll take you down the mountain and have him teach you some. Trust me, once you've grown up big and tall you'll be glad you learned Suhiko. How do you know I will? Damn it, Naruto, I just explained to you why you should learn. No, not that. How do you know I'm going to big and tall? I'm short. Sora got a very peculiar look in her eye. Then she smiled ruefully and shook her head. Just trust me, kid, you're going to hit 6 feet. Hinata sat at the low table and breathed out slowly. She looked through the railings of the porch at the mountains beyond and forced herself to calm. If she was too nervous when she tried to do this, she would end up with a crooked painting. Calmly she dipped her brush in the ink and then blotted off the excess water. Taking another breath, she set the tip of the brush lightly against the paper and began to move. The door slammed open. Hey, Hinata, what you doing? She started and drew a crooked black line across her paper. She stared down at it in disappointment before throwing it away. How are you, Naruto-kun? She asked in a soft voice. Talking to him was getting easier and easier. She was still shy and unsure about what to talk about, but getting the actual words past her lips was not so impossible anymore. Good, he said, sitting down across from her at the table, a bowl of noodle stir-fry, temporary ramen substitute, in his hand. Nei-chan just finished teaching me the grass fire no jutsu. Hinata smiled. They had been working on that one for a few days now and Naruto had been having a particularly hard time with it. Sora had been starting to worry that they weren't going to have any grass left in the front. What you working on? He asked again. Brush painting. When Ichan mentioned that she was going to have us start learning how to make scrolls, so I thought I would see how much I remember. You paint? She nodded and dipped her brush back in the ink. When'd you learn? When I was growing up. Hanabi and I both took lessons. He watched her paint a few cherry blossoms onto the paper. Really? And that's going to help you make scrolls? Well, it's the type of same brush and ink, so. Cool, can I try? Naruto interrupted. Hinata smiled and passed the brush to Naruto, who tried to write his name on the rice paper. He was disappointed when the bristles started splitting, giving him 2 uneven lines instead of 1 smooth stroke. Eh? He groaned. He tried once again, but only made a worse one. I think you're pressing too hard. That's why you're getting 2 lines. I'll get it, he grumbled. Hinata smiled at him, as he scrunched up his nose and kept trying to copy Hinata's cherry blossoms. Somehow, in all the thinking and daydreaming she'd done about Naruto over the years, she had never imagined him trying to learn how to paint. Quietly she took out another bush and dipped it in water. She started on another branch of cherry blossoms, carefully creating each petal. Naruto looked up at her over the table. She was cool, far cooler than he had thought when they were back in Hidden Leaf. Of course she hadn't seemed to talk much back then, so how was he supposed to know she was cool? About 2 months ago he had realized something. He didn't need to yell to get her to listen. He was so used to having to be loud to get people to pay attention to him, that it had come as a shock when she realized she heard what he was saying even when he was muttering under his breath. He had been working on a new jutsu, an entrapment technique based off of the chakra weaving from the scroll. He had not been having an easy time of it. His chakra strings kept getting tangled up into big knots. Damn it! He had muttered, looking at the large mess of chakra and paper in front of him. Stupid things keep getting messed up. I know, Naruto-kun? He had been surprised to hear her voice. He hadn't been yelling or trying to get her attention. It hadn't occurred to him that she might notice what was going on with him without trying to make her. She had stepped shyly forward, head tilted slightly downward. Ano when Ichan said that there was a rhythm to it. Huh, a rhythm. If you keep a steady rhythm up of over-under, they don't get tangled up as much. She had blushed. I was having the same problem. Naruto had brightened. Really? Show me? Hinata had blushed again and nodded. She started tapping her foot at a slow tempo, then brought up the strings of chakra and started weaving them in and out until she had a large square of woven chakra in front of her. Cool. He had breathed, thrilled that he had found the trick. Hinata blushed and looked at her feet. When Ichan says to start slow and speed up the tempo, Naruto had grinned at her, which only made her blush harder. Sama Mason, Hinata-chan. The funny thing was it wasn't just a one-time coincidence. She almost always listened to what he was saying, which prompted him to talk. And then the next thing he knew, he was talking to her all the time. Hinata was more than happy to listen. He seemed to be able to talk for hours without her having to say anything, which was fine with her. She would sit quietly, listening to him talk about ramen, jutsus, complaints about Sora, and others. The more he talked, the more she liked him. She had liked him for years and admired him for as long as she could remember. And the more he talked about becoming Hokage and getting everyone to acknowledge him, the more she liked him. He seemed to be everything she wasn't. Nay, Hinata-chan. She looked up at him, her thoughts interrupted. Hi, these are Sakura blossoms, right? Hi, all right. I'm going to paint the best Sakura branch ever, and send it to Sakura-chan. Hinata smiled slightly as she felt a tiny crack form in her heart. The more he talked, the more she liked him. And the more she knew that she could never tell him. Sora pulled open the door to the porch. I'm going down into the town tomorrow. Yasu has some scrolls that she wants from the library. Do y'all want anything other? She added with a smile. A couple of cases of ramen? Naruto jumped to his feet. Ramen? I wanna come. Sora shook her head. Sorry, kid. Not this time. Eh? But it's been 6 months, and we still haven't been down. Well, you'll just have to wait a few more. I told you I'd take you down when you're ready to learn the more advanced stuff. But why not now? I'm sick of this stupid mountain. Look, I can't take you down right now and you're just going to have to accept it. You said you would explain things, Sora sighed. Okay, look. I am going to need at least one visit to convince Nori to train you. He has some issues with the clan who taught him Shinetsu Hiko. Unfortunately, that means that he has been hesitant to teach it to anyone else. Why? She shrugged. I don't know. I think it brings up unpleasant memories. In any case, I am going to need to convince Yasu-chan and then the two of us are going to have to convince Nori. I can't do that with you two there. Naruto sat back down on the ground and sulked. You'll bring back ramen? She smiled. A whole case, I promise, he snorted. Fine, I guess, thank you. Now I'll be gone anywhere from 3 to 5 days, depending on how long it takes me to convince Nori. Let me give you a few things to work on while I'm gone. A few things turned out to be a whole slew of very dense treatises to read on theories of espionage, which they were supposed to do in addition to working on techniques from the scroll, practicing taijutsu, and keeping the house clean. It seemed that Sora was operating under the assumption that the more they had to do, the less trouble they would get into. As dense as the papers were, Naruto had to admit they were pretty interesting. At least this stuff he could figure out how he was going to use. They were all about the comparative advantages of using one jutsu over the other in different spying situations. When trying to infiltrate a large organization, when trying to infiltrate a small organization. When you didn't exactly know how big the organization was, how to sneak up on people indoors, outdoors, through doors and when there were no doors. It was a prankster's dream. He was eager to try all of this out and she was easily persuaded, so Naruto and Hinata spent the better part of a day playing spy games in the house, trying to steal kunai out of each other's pouches without being detected. Despite some issues at the beginning with being loud and alerting Hinata to his presences, Naruto was determined to get it and started hauling out all sorts of different jutsus he had been taught by Sora over the last few months. It didn't take him long to find all sorts of sneaky things he could do to get the kunai. Standing in semi-darkness, she darted her eyes back and forth down the hallway. It was her turn to be the target, and even if she was not going to be able to keep him from taking her weapon, she hoped to at least make it harder on him than before. Quietly she ran through the seals for a shielding technique and placed light shield around her kunai pouch on her leg. She knew that Sora had taught him how to break this particular one, but it would at least slow him down. She walked to the intersection of two of the hallways and stood in the middle. She had one more technique left that he hadn't seen yet, Vertigo no Jutsu. She ran through the dozen hand seals and created a bubble of genjutsu around herself, filling the intersection. The moment he came within 6 feet of her he would be hit with massive waves of vertigo, and would have trouble standing up. It wasn't wide enough or strong enough to really stop him, but it would buy her some time. Byakugan, she whispered, then began to look around for him. There, down the hall to her left she could see his chakra, with its distinctive swirl in the center. She had never been able to figure out why it did that when no one else's did, but she never managed to work up the courage to ask him. Suddenly, she realized that there were two standing just out of her sight down the hall in front of her and another one behind. Shadow clones. She braced herself for an attack, adding chakra to her genjutsu and moving into fighting stance. He would know that she was aware of his presence now. Knowing Naruto, he would figure if he couldn't get it secretly, he could still get it through battle. She waited for his attack. However, direct attack was not his plan. Years spent as a prankster had kicked in, and he was having fun remembering all of the tricks he used to use. He wasn't, in fact, with his shadow clones on the ground. He was standing above and behind her, crouching on the exposed beams. He was in the exact angle of the blind spot, effectively hiding his presence. Now all he had to do was keep her concentrated on the shadow clones, and he should be able to get a chakra string around one of the kunai and pull it out. It was a good plan and it probably would have worked, except for the vertigo no jutsu. As Hinata got more and more nervous, she pumped more and more chakra into her genjutsu. As that happened, the sphere of influence expanded until finally it reached Naruto, who had no idea that she had used the technique in the first place. It hit him like a ton of bricks. Things started to swirl around him. Suddenly he seemed very, very high off the ground. He stumbled forward a few feet around the main beam until hers started to fall off. Startled by his sudden appearance in her vision, she turned up to look at him. At this point, the clones started to rush forward to catch him, but ended up getting hit by the genjutsu as well, sweeping Hinata up along with them, not making it to Naruto in time and, all stumbling over their own feet, landing on Naruto and Hinata in one giant pile. The clones disappeared, leaving Naruto lying on the floor with Hinata half on top of him, her cheek pressed to his chest. Suddenly her eyes went wide as she realized where she was. She was scrambling backwards off of him when a pain shot through her ankle. She let out a small gasp of pain. Hinata-chan, you okay? Ano, hi. It's just, my ankle, as she tried to stand up, only to find that she couldn't. Her ankle had gotten twisted when she had gotten pushed by the clones. Let me see. Naruto took off Hinata's shoe while she sat there and blushed. It was starting to swell up. Man, it looks like you sprained it. He snorted in frustration. Man, if Sora was here she would be able to heal it right up. After 3 years of training with Swanda, she was a reasonably good healer. But while Hinata's healing powers were slowly growing, they were not good enough to heal her own ankle. This meant no training until Sora got back. Hinata knew exactly what was going through Naruto's mind. She hung her head. She was going to be useless to him until Sora came back. Suddenly she felt herself being half swung, half tossed up into his back. Her arms automatically went around his neck as he started to run down the hall. Naruto-kun? She questioned. We can't train with your ankle sprained. But we can still work on the history junk, right? Ha ha. So, we'll just get so far ahead of that Sora will let us do actual real training for a few days when she gets back. He dumped her in a chair in the library, then ran out again. I'll grab you some ice, he yelled over his shoulder. Hinata stared after him. When had he gotten so thoughtful? Late that night, Naruto and Hinata sat together at the library, across from each other at one of the long tables. The piles of papers, books and scrolls Sora had left them to read surrounded them, illuminated by the 2 small lamps. Hinata had one leg propped up on the chair next to her with an ice pack resting against the side of her ankle. Naruto sat cross-legged in his chair. He had found an article buried in one of the books on interrogation techniques used in espionage. There are 2 key ways to interrogate a subject, the article read. One method is to use intimidation. People in fear of their lives will often become a fountain of knowledge. However, as this often attracts attention, it is a poor method for the undercover ninja. The second is to befriend the subject. This is frequently far more productive. Never underestimate the power of the ideal information passed between friends. Pay attention to everything any contact says to you. Often it is these little pieces of information that help you put together the final pieces of the puzzle. The best way to establish a friendship for the purpose of spying is to use the same procedure you would with any other person you want to make your friend. Begin by asking your subject simple open-ended questions about their lives the same way you would a friend. Naruto frowned. He had never made friends easily. Most people turned their back on him as soon as they figured out what he was. He had a few precious people and even fewer friends. This was going to be hard. Naruto looked up at Hinata. She shifted slightly in her chair and rested her head on her hand. Well, she hadn't realized what he was yet. She was a friend, right? At least, she was as close to one as he had. They could train this while her foot was hurt. Nay, Hinata? She looked up from where she had been reading the history of the use and abuse of soldiers' pills, a comparative approach. Hi. Now he had to think about what he wanted to question her about. Ano, so his voice trailed off. It suddenly occurred to him how little he actually knew about her. He picked up on certain things over the last 6 months. She liked green tea, got nervous when people watched her, and was always ready to help him out. She liked to get up early in the mornings and sit out on the front porch. She practiced hard, trying to learn everything Nei-chan could teach her, and she always remembered to ask the questions he forgot to. But it occurred to him that in terms of actual facts, he knew very little. It made it difficult to find a starting point. Ano, so how old were you when you started training? Good opening question, he decided. I started as soon as I could walk, she said quietly. Her tone was that of someone reciting bare fact, not that of someone describing her past. Really? You've had someone train you all your life? That's so cool. Hinata blushed, but there was sadness in her eyes. She didn't consider it cool. Naruto looked down at the book. Ask your subject question about how they think and feel on particular subjects. It brings them closer to you and will make them open up. Cool, he could do that. Did you like it? Hinata looked up, startled. He hadn't really asked her to talk about her personal life before. They had talked about mutual friends, life in Konoha and how hard the Chunin exam had been, but never about anything really personal before. And her childhood training sessions with her father were personal. Very personal. Naruto waited for Hinata to say something, but an answer didn't seem to be forthcoming. Hinata? He asked. She shook her thought from her head. Gomen, Naruto-kun. She looked up at him. No, I didn't like it. Naruto was shocked. Not like training? How could anyone not like training? What? Why not? I wasn't. Her voice trailed off. He was staring at her, clearly waiting for her answer. She took a deep breath. I wasn't very good at it. What do you mean? Naruto asked, puzzled. I was a disappointment. Now Naruto was really confused. What did she mean, a disappointment? Disappointment to who? To my clan. To my family. To my father. She shook her head. I'm just not very good. I don't get it. Not good? I am not the heir my clan needs me to be. I am not smart. I am not strong. Now Naruto was really confused. Yes, you are. Hinata looked up, eyes wide and glazed with tears. What? You're smart, and you're strong. You remember all of this history junk and you're good at all the taijutsu that Nei-chan has been teaching us. He grinned. Besides, you're my training partner, right? Hinata blushed slightly. Hi, and we train really hard, right? Hi, so when we get back to the village, we're going to be super strong, right? Ha ha, alright. I'll prove to everyone that I'm the best Hokage and you'll prove that you're the best head of the Hyuga house ever, right? Hinata was working hard to keep the tears in her eyes and not spilling over her cheeks. Hi, she said, her voice a little firmer than normal. Naruto grinned. He liked interrogating Hinata. It hadn't been as hard as the book indicated. He hadn't even read the whole page. Once you got the hang of it, it was really a lot of fun. Maybe this was what it was like to really have a close friend. He liked finding things out about her. He would have to ask her more questions. Nay, Hinata? Hi, Naruto-kun? She braced herself for another personal question. What's your favorite color? That was not the type she had been expecting. Color? Before Naruto could reply, they heard the sound of the door being pulled open. The light from their reading lamps did not reach all the way to the doorway, preventing the figure from being seen, save the silhouette provided by the hall light. It was a man. He was tall and his broad shoulders were hung with a long dark cape. Whoever it was, it defiantly wasn't Sora. Itachi had been searching for 5 months and he still hadn't been able to come up with so much as a hint as to where they were. It was baffling, a phenomenon he was not used to. Apparently this woman was excellent at keeping herself hidden. If they really were with Sora, it would seem as if they would be easy to find. A woman of her looks and reputation would attract attention. He would probably not believe his colleague who had made the connection between the woman who had taken the 2-leaf neem and the legend from the east had it not been for the 3 farm workers. They had described her perfectly, and she had been traveling with 2 children who looked like the 2 children. No, it had to be her. There was key information he was missing. He just had to find it. Naruto stood up ready to challenge the figure in the doorway. The man crossed his arms and leaned up against the door jamb. So, he said. You are Naruto and Hinata, I presume. Before either of them could reply, a small voice and the soft rapid pattering of feet was heard coming down the hall. Daddy? It called out. Daddy? 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 The man smiled and reached down to scoop up a small girl in his arms. She had long dark hair shot with white, as if she was starting to go gray. She looked at Naruto and Hinata with wide pale blue eyes. Miki-chan, this is Naruto and Hinata. They are your Aunt Sora's students. Aunt Soa? That's right. He looked back up the 2 genin who were staring at him. Naruto, Hinata, this is my daughter Miki. And I am Nori. Naruto's eyes went wide. You're the Shina expert who is going to teach me all the advanced stuff? Some of the sparkle went out of Nori's eyes. I might. I haven't decided yet. Nay, nay. What are you going to teach me? You mean they're actually in the library? Sora appeared in the doorway, peeking around Nori's shoulders. I can't believe you 2 are studying. Actually, she turned to Naruto. What I can't believe is that you are studying. Ha! I'll show you. He waved a hand at the pile in front of him. This stuff is easy. I'll know it all by the end of the week. Great. I have tons more stuff to give you to read then. Sora smiled sweetly as Naruto's stomach dropped. Anowani-chan? Hi, Hinata-chan? Yuri wearing pants. Naruto looked around the edge of the table. Sure enough, Sora's miniskirt and fishnets were gone, although she probably still had the boots on. From hip to heel, her legs were covered in matte black leather. They weren't even really tight. If it wasn't for the material they would have looked like normal pants. They were, without a doubt, the most conservative article of clothing either of them had ever seen her in, save the large, fluffy bathrobe. Yeah, so? Sora shifted from foot to foot. They're nice and soft. Very comfortable. Comfortable was not what Sora looked like. Nori was trying to stifle a laugh behind one hand. Hinata smiled. They look nice, Wani-chan. Thank you, Hinata-chan. Suddenly her eyes narrowed. Hinata-chan, why are you icing your ankle? Hinata and Naruto looked guilty at each other. Ano, well, we think I sprained it. With one clean swipe, Sora snatched the ice off of Hinata's foot. You think you sprained it? It's the size of a grapefruit. Haha, guess she, did then, didn't she? Naruto said awkwardly, hand rubbing the back of his head. Steam was starting to come out of Sora's ears. Naruto, why do I get the feeling that you are the one responsible for this? Damn it, can't I leave you 2 alone for 48 hours without something happening? It was an accident. Sora rolled her eyes. I really can't trust the 2 of you alone. Walking over to Hinata, she activated a healing technique, and then gently laid her hands on the ankle. Hinata breathed in sharply as Sora's hands began to glow blue. Her ankle went cold and then warm and the swelling began to go down. Standing up, Sora brushed her hands together. I sped up the healing, so it should be fine by tomorrow. But you are going to have to stay completely off of it until then. She looked over at Naruto. That means you're going to have to carry her. Fitting, seeing as you did it. Naruto jumped up from his seat. What makes you think I did it? Why do I always get blamed for these things? It wasn't my fault. Sora dismissed his comments with a wave of her hand. Whatever. Just come down to the kitchen. Naruto moved around the table to offer his back to Hinata. Her cheeks went red, but she gingerly wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled herself up against his back. His arms slid under her legs as he adjusted her weight. Hinata and Naruto followed the 2 adults and the little girl out of the library and back down the hall. Naruto turned his head to whisper into Hinata's ear. Even with the pants, she still looks like one of those women Jiraiya. And Naruto suddenly found himself stuck with the silence no jutsu. Yasu was, without a doubt, the most beautiful woman Naruto and Hinata had ever seen. She looked more like a fine porcelain doll than a living human. Her thick white hair was pulled up into a knot at the crown of her head and held in place by a few simple hairpins. Her skin was pale and perfectly smooth, without a smile line or wrinkle. She would have almost looked like an albino if it wasn't for her large pale green eyes. The sleeves of her kimono were tied back and she was in the process of slicing vegetables. Oka-san! Miki yelled, stretching her arms out to the woman. She smiled and plucked the child out of her husband's arms. So, you two must be the new apprentices. Naruto and Hinata nodded. And you survived living with Sora for 6 months? They nodded again. Yasu shook her head. I'm amazed. Still, either of your clothes really fit. She looked up at Sora. They're teenagers. They're not going to fit into the same clothes for 6 months. Well, what am I supposed to do? Sora said, rooting through the various bags on the counter until she found her chocolates. Tearing the plastic off the box, she eagerly removed the lid and started eating. You are supposed to take them down the mountain and get them new clothes. Honestly, you can be so irresponsible. That's why I'm friends with you. You're responsible enough for both of us. Yasu shot her a glare. All right. I think there's some old clothes in one of the storage rooms upstairs. I'll go looking for them. She spun and left the kitchen. Yasu sighed. Still the same Sora, she muttered. She shook her head and looked at the pair. Naruto had set Hinata down on a free span of countertop and was still standing next to her. He seemed oblivious to the blush on the girl's cheeks. Yasu smiled. Sora was right. The girl was in love with him, and he was clueless. So has she made you do that scroll yet? You know about that? Hinata sounded surprised. Of course. She never went anywhere without it, which I always thought was rather strange considering how dead set she was against training anyone. You two must be pretty special to change her mind. Of course we are. Hinata's the heir to the Hyuga clan and I'm going to be Hokage. Yasu's eyes widened. A clan heir and a kid who wants to be Hokage? Something had to be going on here. Sora would never train these two willingly. Further questioning of Sora was definitely called for. So, how far have you gotten on the scroll? We've almost finished. We just have about 5 more to go. Yasu chuckled. And you've only been up here 6 months. Sora took over a year to learn all those skills. Naruto's eyes widened in delight. Really? From what she tells me. But Sora would never tell you. She's entirely too petty. Too petty? She is the queen of small irritating vices. The thing with Sora is that she has never grown up. She is the exact same stubborn, impulsive, and immature teenage brat I started traveling with 8 years ago. She does nothing in particular, wanders around from place to place being moody and has the most appalling fashion sense I have ever seen. Then why did you travel with her? Hinata asked. Despite all of that, she is one hell of a good fighter. One of the best in the eastern lands. Plus, she's as good a partner as they come. In the 5 years we traveled together she never let me down when it counted. What about when it didn't count? Yasu narrowed her eyes. She was apt at playing practical jokes. Practical jokes? She liked to get people with genjutsu when they weren't paying attention. Guy insults her, and he was liable to end up with his voice raised an octave for a few hours. When she was really irritated she would use Henj no Jutsu and voice change no Jutsu on the guy to make the offender look and talk like a dog. It was one of the best ideas Naruto had ever heard. He had to get Nei-chan to teach that to him. He could turn Sasuke into rabbit or something. Better yet, he could turn Nei-chan into a toad. Hinata seemed vaguely distressed by the whole thing. She would really do that, sometimes to entire groups of men. It was one of her favorite pastimes while we were on the road. And no one realized it was her? Naruto asked eagerly. Only rarely. Of course with her bloodline it was easy to. Don't tell them please, I'm making them guess. Sora stood in the doorway, leaning up against the door jamb with her arms crossed over her chest. Ah, come on. Naruto grumbled. I used it in front of you already, you should be able to figure it out. She looked back at Yasu. Are you in here going through that whole never grew up thing again? When you dress like that, you can hardly blame me. Getting you into those pants is the biggest fashion victory I've had since I got you out of that goddamn dress. Sora rolled her eyes. Do you always have to bring up the dress? You were the one who wore the dress. Naruto thought this was great. Not only was he learning new things to bug Nei-chan to teach him, but he was also learning about things she was embarrassed about. Yasu would have to come over more often. Nay. What dress? Sora and Yasu looked at each other. Yasu-chan, Sora warned. Sweetheart, Yasu called out with a smile. Suddenly Nori was behind Sora, holding her arms behind her back. What the hell? I can do better than tell you about it, Naruto-kun. I can show it to you. She reached for her bag and pulled out a small photo album. No! Sora yelled, struggling against Nori, trying to get her feet in the right position to throw him. Why the hell did you bring those? You suddenly have students after all your swearing that you would never take any on, and you expect me not to try and embarrass you. Honestly, I thought you knew me better than that. She smiled and handed the little book over to Naruto. Here you go. Sora, age 17. She was wearing boots very similar to the ones she wore now, but instead of a skirt she seemed to only be wearing a pair of underwear. The dress was nothing more than 3 panels of black leather laced together with red ribbon which left wide stripes of skin exposed up her front and down either side. Her hair was half red half black and done in huge sausage curls. She was sitting on a bar stool, toasting the camera with some sort of pink drink. Naruto took one look at the picture and burst out laughing. Oh, this was good, this was really, really good. He would be able to hound her about this to no end. Howling, he passed the photo to Hinata. She contented herself with more restrained giggles. Ha ha ha, go ahead and laugh. Sora glared at them. I'm so going to get you for this, Yasu. See what I mean? She's just like a child. Now if you want to see something really funny, I have some in here of her ex. Hey Yasu, remember that time we were staying at that inn just after I introduced you to Nori? Yasu went deadly silent and scowled at Sora. Her scowl deepened as Sora started to smile at her. She closed the photo album with a snap. Who would like a cup of tea? Nori released Sora's arms. She smiled at Yasu. That sounds lovely. But we should all probably be getting to bed soon. It's awfully late, she said in a falsely sweet voice, taking the tray from Yasu. The two of them went into the living room. Hinata looked at Naruto, and then at Nori. What just happened? Nori shook his head. They've been friends for so long that they know almost all of each other's secrets. Sora just wanted to share a story about Yasu if she didn't put away the pictures. Oh. Hinata thought about that for a second. Sora said she introduced you to Yasu. Hi. Just after Naruto died, Sora came to stay with my clan. My mother, who was at that time the head of the clan, had been good friends with Naruto and took Sora under her wing. When there was a revolution in the clan and the branch family took over, I left and took Sora with me. The branch family revolted? But it is duty of the branch family to protect the head family. My mother was a good woman and an excellent leader, but her cousin still resented the fact that she had the power and control. In the end she killed everyone in the head family that she could, claiming that we had been changing the clan too fast and that a return to the old ways was necessary. But that's awful. That's clan life a lot of the time, strong against outside forces, but constantly battling itself. In any case, I needed to make a living and the only thing I was trained for was to be a mercenary. No matter how good she was, I didn't want to haul a 13-year-old around with me, so I left her with Tsunade. We kept in contact, but we didn't really see each other for 6 years. Then I met Yasu, we eventually settled down and Sora started wandering alone. Until she picked up you guys, that is, he added with a quick smile. Why didn't she get a new partner? She's always been wary of bringing people into her life. Naruto died, and Sora was a wreck. She showed up at our door a disheveled mess one day and was like a ghost for weeks. Then one day she just snapped out of it, as if she had been haunted and the ghost had left. He shrugged. She became the Sora we know now. I can count the people she considers friends on one hand. Naruto pondered this for a second. Nay, Nori-san? Hi. How did Nanashi-sensei die? I don't know. There are 2 things that Sora has never told anyone about, not even us. One is how she came to be in Nanashi's care. The other is how Naruto died. Early the next morning, Sora, Yasu and Nori sat out on the front steps watching the sun rise. They all knew what they had to talk about, and they were all waiting for one of the others to break the silence. Finally Sora spoke. So, are you going to help me train them? Yasu looked over at her. I still want an explanation as to why they're with you in the first place. I told you, Oba-chan asked me to. That's not enough reason for you. Who are those 2, Sora-chan? They're just Leaf Nin that Tsunade asked me to look after and train. They are not just Leaf Nin. You have the single loudest ninja I have ever met in my life and the most timid one. You should have seen them when they got here, Sora mumbled. Yasu continued as if Sora hadn't interrupted. Not only that, but from what I've seen and what you've told me, he has no family, very little natural ability, and his impulsivity is off the charts while she is under her family's thumb. Is blessed with an extremely powerful bloodline but she is too hesitant to use. They're perfect opposites, Nori said quietly staring into the sunrise. He turned to Sora. You said they work well together? They seem to. And Naruto is good at ninjutsu where Hinata is good at genjutsu. Hi, but they're both decent at taijutsu and getting better. If you just help me train Naruto in the advanced stuff, I can do the rest. Nori looked at Sora and then back out at the dawn. Yasu narrowed her eyes. Sweetheart, I don't like that look. You need to partner train them. Nanny? Partner train them. Like what my family does. You're teaching them complementary styles, you ought to at least train them to work together. But we left before I could learn any of the partner stuff. I'll teach them the taijutsu stuff and you and Yasu worked well enough together for you to teach the other things. The partner trials were legendary in the house. Even if you didn't participate in them, you know basically what they were. It would be silly for you not to partner train them, but Hinata has a crush, if not in love, on Naruto. He's the densest person I've ever met, but if I put them together in partner training it's bound to come out. That could wreck the partnership. Or he could realize that he is in love with her too. Sora groaned. Right, just what I need. A pair of hormonal teenagers in love. Yasu and Nori chuckled. You brought it on yourself, Yasu said. Sora lay her face in her hands. Fine. If you will teach them the taijutsu part, I will do the rest of the partner training. Nori smiled. Good. You're always a reasonable person when forced to be. Naruto stumbled into the kitchen. It was later than he normally got up, but Sora's unusual morning serenade had been curiously absent. What happened to the music? Yasu looked up from where she was chopping vegetables. I don't let her play it when I'm here. She went back to chopping. We have something to discuss with you and Hinata. You should probably go wake her up. Ano, you mean like and go in her room? Naruto had never been in a girl's room before. Generally waking someone up would imply going into their room. Unless, of course, you want to yell at her through the door. Relief washed over Naruto. He could just yell at her to get up from the hall. No one was louder than him. Racing up the stairs, he slid to a stop at Hinata's door. He knocked the door with the side of his fist. Hey Hinata-chan. It's time to get up. No reply, so he knocked harder. Hinata-chan. Hinata-chan. Still not a sound. He took a deep breath and started to yell Hinata-chan. Naruto, what on earth are you doing? Sora stood just outside the doorway to her room, hands on her hips glaring at him. Yasu said to get Hinata up, then go in there and wake her up. She obviously can't hear you. Naruto looked between Sora and the door in confusion. But Hinata had always heard him, why not now? Tentatively he pulled the door open. He could see her curled up in her futon, sleeping peacefully. He quietly walked over to kneel down beside her, leaning down so he could look at her face. Her cheeks were faintly flushed, and a few strands of hair stuck to the sides of her face. The front was the same as ever, blunt bangs in 2 pieces framing her face. However, Sora had declared that she was unable to cut Hinata's hair into what Sora referred to as the duck butt, and as Hinata couldn't cut it herself, that had been left to grow. Now it stopped about an inch above her shoulder, and was currently fanned out over the pillow. Naruto smiled and had a curious urge to let her sleep. She looked so peaceful, so calm, tucked up in her blankets without a worry in the world. Then Naruto had an even more curious urge to crawl in with her, and go back to sleep himself. When he realized what he had just considered, he shot upright and scooted a few inches away from the bed. Where the hell had that thought come from? Carefully, he reached out his hand to place it on her shoulder. The soft cotton of her sleeping kimono felt warm under his palm. He started to gently shake her. Hinata-chan? Hinata's face twitched slightly, and she scrunched up her nose. Slowly her eyes began to open, still glazed over from sleep. There was something orange next to her bed. Ano, Hinata-chan? Hinata's eyes shot open as she sat straight up in bed. Surprised, Naruto fell backwards onto his rear end and stared at her. Hinata stared back, eyes wide and bedsheet clutched to her chest. Naruto-kun? She asked in a confused and slightly panicky voice. Hinata-chan. You see you weren't up and Yasu thought that I wake you and I yelled but you didn't hear and then Sora came and I was supposed to go in and then. He turned beet red and quickly stammered the last piece of the message. Sora and Yasu went to talk to Saiyo in the kitchen. And he bolted out of the room. Yasu looked at Sora. What did you do? I put a sound barrier around Hinata's room so he would have to go in and wake her up. The point being, to embarrass the hell out of both of them. Yasu sighed and shook her head. As I said before, you've never grown up. Yasu and Sora sat across the table from Naruto and Hinata, staring at them. The 2 teens shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Ano, where is Nori-san? My husband is the mayor of the town. He had to go back. Then he's not going to teach me? Naruto was crushed. Sora shook her head. He is going to teach you. However, he wanted us to propose something to the 2 of you. What? As you may know, the West and the East work on 2 completely different political systems. The hidden villages work on almost a feudal system. Each clan owes allegiance to the Kage who provides leadership and protection to them. In the West, things are far more confused. Some people side with a clan, others a religious group, still others with the people they live with. The West is also far more urbanized than the East. Yeah, we know all that. What's the point? The point, Naruto, is that many of the clans can be more powerful than the Kages. Some have bloodlines and others are simply political powerhouses. Nori and I were both trained by the Kaze clan from where the Shina forms were born. We share a mutual hatred for the clan, but that doesn't mean that the methods they used were any less effective. The fact is, Yasu said, that the Kaze clan gains a great deal of its power from the fact that its fighters work so well together. While they excel in medium to large groups, their real power comes from the partner training. Partner training? Naruto asked. Once basic training is done, all trainees are paired up. They form partnership that will last for years, sometimes over someone's entire fighting career. Sort of like your genin trainee groups, but more permanent, Sora added, and usually more powerful. A well-trained pairing can be 2 or 3 times more powerful than the individual powers of the fighters combined. What's this got to do with us? Naruto asked again. Yasu and Sora exchanged glances. My husband thinks that the 2 of you should be partner trained. While it doesn't mean that the 2 of you won't be able to work alone or with other people, but it does mean a commitment to each other. Commitment? Weren't guys supposed to run at the word commitment? Basically, it means that you're going to be friends, close friends, for the rest of your lives. There are no secrets in between partners. They have to know you so well they can predict what you are going to do in any given situation. You have to be able to see their flaws and still basically like the person. Yasu smiled. It's sort of like being married. Naruto and Hinata paled. Without the sex, of course, Sora added. Well, actually it was only generally without the sex. Many partners became in fact husband and wife as well, but the choice has to be yours. Either you commit to partner training and we start, or we keeping going the way we have. Your choice. Hinata shifted in her chair. You mean we have to commit to being partner for the rest of our lives? Not necessarily. Yasu-chan got married and now we're not really partners anymore. But if you're partner trained, when you go back to Hidden Leaf it would be silly for Oba-chan to have you on separate teams. It would last beyond your 3 years here. Naruto and Hinata looked at each other. Not be on their teams anymore? The breaking up of their teams had seemed so far in the future. Yasu smiled. I know it's overwhelming. Children from the Kaze clan have their whole lives to come to terms with the idea, and even for them when the time comes to pick a partner, they're unsure. Fortunately, we have an exercise to help you decide. Hinata and Naruto looked up, still in a daze. What kind of exercise could help them for such a delicate decision? Sora smiled and stood up. This way. They walked up the 3rd story of the house. There, Sora opened the door to a large room and gestured the pair inside. Okay, so there are futons in the closet over there and a bathroom through that door. We'll come back and bring you food later. You have 24 hours to talk it out. Have fun, Nanny! Naruto yelled and she slammed the door shut. Running over he pulled on the door but it didn't budge. They were locked in. What if Naruto gets married on his training trip Naruhina? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content then do consider subscribing to my channel, and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.